There we go. Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome. How's it going? Welcome to the Nighttime Economy Forum. Thank you so much for showing up. Really appreciate it. We're going to crack straight into it. We're kind of limited time. We have a lot to get through, and there's a lot of issues to discuss. Just to start out, just a little bit of housekeeping. If I could ask, there's a very appropriately timed phone tone, if I could ask if we could ensure that our phones are on silent for the next while, that'd be great. Just so you know as well, the doors are to the right of the doors you just came through, up the stairs. There's also an accessible toilet just outside the door on the right. Be aware as well that we have a photographer on site, and this event is being live streamed as well. And in the event of an emergency, just want to make sure you're aware of fire exits to the left here, and also at the back, the one that you just came in. So just to start us off, I'd like to introduce Maureen Kennelly, who's the Director of the Arts Council, to come up and give us some opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Robbie. Good afternoon, everybody. It's absolutely brilliant to see you in this lovely, warm, cosy venue. It's a lovely way to kick off the year with a gathering like this. So, Happy New Year, everybody. I think we're still in time to say Happy New Year, and I hope everybody's had a wonderful break and ready for everything that 2023 brings to us. And isn't it just marvellous to be able to gather in this way? Like, it's staggering when you think that this time last year we actually weren't able to do that because we were still under dreaded lockdown restrictions. So, another reason to celebrate. So there's a great programme together for you this afternoon. It's been designed to bring together a range of international, national and local perspectives on the emerging trends and initiatives in relation to the development of the arts and the nighttime economy. And what we really hope this afternoon is going to do is to stimulate new initiatives and partnerships and to generate new thinking around specific actions to support the role of the arts in creating that vibrant nighttime economy. And the forum will be chaired by Robbie Kidd. So thanks so much, Robbie, for being free to do this and for all the fantastic input you've put into the nighttime economy to date. It's been wonderful to observe the progress in the last year and a half or so. And I want to say a huge thanks to my own team at the Arts Council for all their fantastic work on this. We've been working very closely with Grania Millers. Thank you, Grania. And special thanks to all the presenters and chairs, and particularly to those of you who have carved time to travel and be with us here. Thanks too to our partners in the Department of Arts and Culture. It's been a real pleasure working with you on this. And to everybody here, led by Caroline Campbell at the National Gallery of Ireland, for your very warm welcome. And congratulations, Caroline, on your newish role. Still, it's wonderful to have you here with us. So I just wanted to mention very briefly a few things that are particularly pertinent to the Arts Council's work in terms of nighttime economy, because we are a very active part, of course, of the task force which was set up by Ms. Catherine Martin back in July 2020, and a lot has been achieved, yet a lot more to do too, of course. So one of the things that's most advanced with us is the commissioning of an audit of spaces. So this is whereby we're updating a map of public-facing arts and cultural facilities in Ireland, and so that we will provide details of venues which could potentially be used in the nighttime economy. And that database is going to be expanded to some state-owned buildings that would have potential as well. And I think over the summer we saw, it was really fantastic to see national culture institutions like IMA and like the Concert Hall and National Museum and a range of others really stretch beyond their usual programmes and present a range of nighttime events, and so encouraging too to see the new audiences that came to them. So there's going to be lots more of that, which is brilliant. We will also be establishing pilot schemes to help existing arts and cultural spaces and to look at the viability of staying open late. It's a complex business. It's not simply a matter of saying, we just want you to stay open until 2 o'clock in the morning. There's much to be considered in the approach to it. So we will be coming forward with details soon of an action-based research pilot in a number of locations, so which, as I say, will look at the feasibility of opening late. And of course, since COVID, during and after COVID, we saw that there are new dedicated outdoor public spaces where publicly funded activities can take place. So we hope very much to encourage the use of those, so that, you know, it's a far wider family of collaborators, and I think that's only to the good. And once that database that I mentioned at the top has been updated, we'll be conducting a more in-depth survey of the facilities with view to updating the information about the facility. And something that's very, very prominent in our minds is physical accessibility.
So we're focused there in terms of both audience and artist and backstage facilities. And some of you may have read a very powerful article by Louise Bruton, who I think is here, where she highlighted the desperately inadequate availability of accessible venues. So that's something that's very much to the fore in our thinking. And of course, there are other then considerations in terms of space and flexibility and seating and so on. So all that's going to go into the mix. But going back to Louise's article yesterday, she had a very powerful line where she said, we need to find out where we have gone wrong to go ahead and make things right. So that's very much the focus with us in terms of that audit. And then two final very quick things to mention. Culture Night, and you'll hear from my colleague Sinead O'Reilly shortly about Culture Night. The Arts Council took stewardship of Culture Night 4 years ago, and in the last few years in particular, we've looked at how can we make this a more accessible and inclusive enterprise. And I'm glad to say that we have a huge number of new collaborators, venues, partners right across the country, and that includes numerous new late-time events. So the nighttime economy, the particularly late night, is a very prominent feature of Culture Night in the years to come. And you'll hear more from Sinead on that, as I said. And then very finally, hopefully many of you know that we're working very closely with a new partner, with Dublin Port, and we're working with them towards developing a large-scale shared artist workspace model in the area, which is massively exciting. And that's one that we hope will very much serve as a model for other cities and towns throughout Ireland. So we'll be having our final workshop session with Grafton Architects on that in a couple of days' time. So we look forward to revealing more about that as it takes shape. But hopefully that, as I say, is something that can be modelled further afield. So that's making for very exciting thinking at the moment. Shortly, you'll hear from Ruth McGowan as well, the outgoing director of Dublin Fringe Festival. Towards the end of the Fringe Festival, I saw that Ruth was tweeting an image of a poster on a lamppost in city centre. It said, "Artists make a city worth living in." How simple that is, but how powerful and true it is indeed. And as we continue to rebuild our society post-COVID, and now that we have renewed clarity about the role of the arts in our society, and we have massively increased investment, this makes for a really exciting and once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make lasting and real change happen. So along with all of you, I'm very much looking forward to today's discussions. I want to say a huge thanks to you for taking the time to be here with us today. I hope you enjoy it, and I'm delighted now to hand you back to Robbie.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for that intro and yeah, really, really good overview of what some of the work that has been going on in the background before this forum has been established. Just to give you a bit of context of who I am, my name is Robbie Kitt. I'm a DJ and musician. I'm involved in the Give Us the Night campaign. And I suppose, yeah, we're here to talk about the nighttime economy. And I suppose as part of that conversation, I think it's important for us to take honest stock of where we are and what the state of the nighttime economy is in. Because the picture, as I'm sure many of the operators and practitioners in this room will know, is incredibly difficult and challenging as well. So to give a bit more context on the Give Us the Night campaign, which has been going for 18 years, it was founded by Sunil Sharp, who's here today. I've been involved for the last 5 years, and the campaign has tried to highlight the decline in the specific areas of kind of nightclub and dancing and electronic music in the nighttime economy. Since 2001, in that context, I suppose, our stock of dance floors in the country has reduced by 80% from over 500 to around 80 today. So historically, it's hard to see the state as not being very, I suppose, anything other really than adversarial towards certain types of activity given this situation. But interestingly, this isn't the first time in Irish history that this has been the perception from cultural communities. In 1935, the Public Dance Halls Act, which I often talk about, was introduced, and it essentially barred the country house dance and brought the playing and practicing of traditional Irish music outside of its natural cultural environment into parish halls where the music simply didn't fit. The church had lobbied very hard for this legislation through something that was called the Carrigan Commission at the time because of concerns about the social and sexual behaviours of young people. Traditional musicians at the time also saw this as an opportunity for the church to make some money from their cultural activities. Regardless of the clerical oversight of social behaviours, they also recognised that there was short-term economic thinking behind the decision to bar kind of these Irish house dances. And as Junior Crean, who was a traditional musician at the time, accounted at the time, he said, "The music nearly died out altogether. Irish music. Then the emigration started. A lot of the lads I used to play with went off to England and America, and there was no one but myself. And he spoke of how traditional music didn't fit in the parish hall and how they had lost the space to express their culture in appropriate and suitable ways. And I think the point is something that has to be raised again now in 2023. When we're talking about our nighttime economy, we find ourselves without the space and place for our cultural practitioners to be able to truly express themselves in their own terms. And we also find ourselves at an automatic deficit of cultural capital due to the fact that generations upon generations of cultural practitioners have felt they have no choice but to leave for economic opportunities in the cultural sphere elsewhere. And we're losing these practitioners by the boatload every day. There's no real sensible economic decision to stay in Ireland, and even our most promising young acts have no choice but to leave to expand their careers because it simply does not make economic sense for them to be here. And that paints an economic picture that I think we really need to be aware of. There's been some considerable work done by the Nighttime Economy Task Force towards these problems over the last couple of years, and I have to pay tribute to all the civil servants who've been involved in that, and Minister Catherine Martin as well, for the work that's gone in behind the scenes. I think the aptly named Haunted Dance Hall, which is something that Maureen just referred to, the event that happened in the National Concert Hall, again, aptly named, I suppose, in context of those conversations about dance halls of the dance halls of the past in Ireland, is something that shows what kind of innovation is possible, I think, because for 2 nights in October last year, the National Concert Hall opened its doors for a late-night electronic music festival that had people dancing in the halls until 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was genuinely a historic, brilliant event. And like often, I think, again, Maureen talked about this, we ask how can we engage with new audiences in these kind of publicly funded arts infrastructure that we have throughout the state. And I think that when you see people dancing in a space, it's a really good sign that they're comfortable in that space, And that event, of course, was sold out, and there was a lot of demand for it. And as somebody who was privileged enough to even to play at it, it also gave me a chance as a performer and a cultural practitioner to see a path for my own practice that could eventually lead to me sharing work in such brilliant infrastructure that's available within the state. So by opening up these public buildings in this way, it gives opportunity for artists to see themselves and their work in those spaces. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, really, with the Nighttime Economy Task Force. The report that was published in 2021 outlined 36 different distinct actions, including the establishment of this annual forum. And I'd encourage anyone who hasn't actually looked at that report to check it out and just to see what work is ongoing. I suppose that is why I'm excited about this forum as well, because the nighttime economy is part of our economy where we can offer the type of innovative cultural and social practitioners in our society space to grow and develop within a domestic nighttime economy. If we embrace it and realize that it's essentially the greenhouse in which many of these cultural movements will grow, rather than approaching with fear and misunderstanding, and like with inclusivity, I think, as central to the foundation of the conversation around a healthy nighttime economy, we can begin to develop incredibly strong, inclusive cultural economies within this country. And in exploring all options, including the use of accessible public buildings, for example, we can start to come up with pragmatic solutions towards issues that we face in relation to accessibility and inclusivity within our cultural late-night economies. And I think one of the biggest, the most exciting thing for that within that conversation for me is that it would mean that people and practitioners here would get a chance to stay here, because we've really not got that many homegrown heroes emerging out of Ireland these days because the conditions aren't there for them to actually stay at home. And I think, speaking of homegrown heroes, I really want to take this opportunity to pay credit to Sunil Sharp, because the voluntary work that he does for cultural communities that he represents and the commitment he's shown to the issues he's campaigning for is some of the most inspiring work that I've ever seen. And I think it's important to recognise that this conversation would likely not be happening without him. So I just want to take a moment just to recognise Sunil Sharp now. The nighttime economy should be for all of society, and through a diverse offering we can hope to open it across all age demographics to be truly inclusive in terms of people's accessibility needs and their ability to access the nighttime economy. However, we have to think about young people, in my opinion, and how important the nighttime economy is for them. The social and cultural sector of our nighttime economy should provide the spaces and places where these people build their lives. The social infrastructure that perhaps previous generations took for granted is largely gone in this country. The places where your parents met aren't there for the next generation to meet and connect. Collective social and cultural environments are a massively important part of our social health in our country. And I was just in Berlin at the weekend playing a gig, and I was walking around the place. I was playing at 5 o'clock in the morning, by the way. And I was strolling around before my gig around 11 o'clock. And I just noticed that the flower shops were open until 12 a.m. And I thought this was just a really interesting, very nice, tacit economic recognition of, I suppose, the social needs that are present within the nighttime economy. You know, because like romance doesn't go to bed at 6 p.m. And sometimes you might find yourself in need of a bouquet at 10 p.m. for whatever reason, doesn't really matter. But you know, it's just a little example that like the type of diversity that we're not that accustomed to in our own nighttime economy is present elsewhere in Europe. There are really, really good examples. And it also speaks to how important the nighttime economy is as a social economy and how we have to recognize the importance of that social economy if we're to truly recognize the economic importance of the nighttime economy. So I just hope, events like this signify a sea change in attitude towards cultural activity in the nighttime economy and shows that we're beginning to recognize the deeply important role that cultural spaces have in the fabric of our lives as citizens of this country. The nighttime economy is a hugely important part of our social economy, as I just said. The function of this conference and the forum is to link up the ideas of people who can do it. And those are the people who are in this room, by the way, the practitioners. You are the ones who actually know how to do it. I suppose the function of this forum is to link your ideas up with the state. And we need to find solutions for young people. We need to find solutions for people with accessibility needs. We need to find solutions for anyone who feels excluded from our nighttime economy as it's currently organized. As I've said before, this has been historically been an adversarial type of relationship when it comes to the nighttime economy between the practitioners and the state. So hopefully this kind of signifies a change in attitude in that regard. Because there's people in this room who know how to do it. And hopefully those ideas can connect meaningfully and be reflected in policy that's developed out of conversations like these. So to get us started, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, who is Terry Stevens. To give it an introduction to Terry, Professor Terry Stevens is primarily known for his tourism work. Indeed, he has been advising on many different aspects of tourism in over 50 countries and in Ireland since 1987. He's originally from East Coker in Somerset, and here is the first cultural reference. East Coker was the ancestral home of T.S. Eliot, whose second poem in 4 quartets is, of course, titled East Coker, whose famous opening lines are, "In my beginning is my end, in my end is my beginning." And Terry's father, the village carpenter and undertaker, buried T.S. Eliot. The village was also home to William Dampier, 17th century explorer, naturalist, and pirate who influenced Charles Darwin and Daniel Defoe, who wrote, "A lack of prejudice and an extinguishable curiosity makes one an instinctive traveller." Sir Nathan Matthew was also from the village. He was the Under-Secretary of State for Ireland at a time of the Easter Uprising. The final cultural references vary from the fact that Terry did the original plans for the GAA Museum at Croke Park and is currently working on the Casement Park project in Belfast, established one of the first international sculpture parks in Britain, once worked for Van Morrison, which I'd love to hear a little bit more about, to be honest, played in a school band with guys who went on without him to form the 1960s innovative progressive soft rock band Stackridge, and has recently received the International Ambassador Award from the City of Belfast for services to tourism. He has established a reputation as a fresh thinker who challenges traditional models of creating distinctive places and destinations. And so just before I welcome Terry to the stage, I just want to say his slides will be made available after the presentation, so don't worry if you miss any of the text within the slides that he's about to present. And so I might welcome to the stage Professor Terry Stevens.
Thank you, Robbie. I think the opening comment I'd like to make is one that shouldn't be in any way an obstruction to such an enlightened audience. But in general, I think the people that you speak to and you need to engage in the debates that you're having probably equate, as do I, the notion of the night being dark. And I think we're at a period now where we need to think about the 24/7 city, and in that way get away from the idea that what we're talking about when we talk about the nighttime economy is just that period of darkness. And if we were having this debate in Finland or Iceland, then we'd be having a very different discussion about some of the solutions and opportunities that emerge from how they would define the nighttime economy. Even here, for some parts of the year, you're talking about 12 hours of darkness, and in other times of the year, 6 hours of darkness. So, sorry, the slides up here aren't working. Could you just get these screens on? Anyway, look, I will progress. What I want to do and what I want to cover in the next 20 minutes or so is kind of setting the scene, having a look at what we mean by the nighttime economy, nightlife, then having a look at some of the market trends and the implications for you in addressing the issues which you're trying to meet with the initiatives that you're taking here. And then finally look at some international best practice examples, thank you very much, and draw some conclusions from that. So just sort of setting the scene. Well, we've inherited, it's ingrained with us, all sorts of notions and perceptions about the night. And very often, those relate to this idea of the dark. You know, for Joyce, it was the skin dark night. If you look at what Them said with Van Morrison, the long, long, lonely night. Quite foreboding language, quite negative language. For Jim Morrison of The Doors, it was like the throw of a dice, almost implying the risk-taking of going out in the night time. And I suppose the ultimate of this expression of the fear of the night, or our uncertainty, our anxiety of the night, is in Warren Zevon's Werewolves of London, where it ends up with an old lady getting mutilated by the werewolves of London. For T.S. Eliot, you know, the poet of The Village of My Birth, you know, he relates the night to being like a patient etherized upon a table. You know, this popular culture is deeply reinforcing loads of anxieties that we might have about the night. But I suppose there's some hope. Milton talked about what's night got to do with sleep, implying the 24 hours daytime, that we need to look at the way in which the night morphs with the day. And for Van Gogh, the night was certainly more alive and more colorful than the day. So I suppose you've had your task force looking at things for 5 years, but I do think there's a need to just get back to this idea of what are we really talking about? And for me, it's about not necessarily the time when it gets dark, when the sun goes down to when the sun rises. It's about that whole period, which may be after the traditional 5 o'clock flight from the center of our cities. We need to be looking at it in a much more rounded way. So, you know, the nighttime, the nightlife, the nighttime economy. All sorts of the partners that you wish to work with will enter this equation with a different set of interpretations of what you might mean. So for me, Maureen and all your colleagues, perhaps there's a starting point which just says, we need to define this in a slightly different way, because I'm sure you do not mean just the time when it gets dark. And if we look at that period after the 5 o'clock flight from the city center, then it's certainly dynamic. The period of time is inconsistent. There's variations by seasons. The weather takes a big impact at different times of the year. There's different cultural meanings, and there's a different geography associated with the way in which we start thinking about the language we use. Now, where in many ways you're very fortunate here in Ireland is because there is policy recognition that this opportunity has to be dealt with and is wrapped up in policy consideration. And the various statements that have emerged in recent months talk about the importance that whatever you do in that period you want to call the nighttime brings vibrancy to the city and town centres. It has the ability to open up the range and diversity an opportunity for residents and visitors to enjoy Ireland and its culture and its heritage. So you do have a policy context, but it remains complex. I mean, at the very simplest level, the hotel I stayed in last night is stuck in an institutional way of responding to my needs as a visitor, which assumes I'm going to be in by 10:30 or 11 o'clock, and I'm going to have breakfast between certain hours. So there are institutions wrapping around you within the cultural and arts community that have got to go on this journey with you. So broadly, we all accept that the night, however we might define it, is rather neglected. We know that it has a vital role to play in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Have a look at Development Goal, Sustainable Development Goal number 11. That we're talking about the potential to change the geography of a city's heartbeat. You know, traditionally, we've looked at how we deal with the night at the city centre. But now we're increasingly interested in matching activity with the 20-minute neighbourhood. So what is happening out there in the suburbs? They need to be part of the prioritisation of an agenda as much as dealing with the city centre. And I always think we've perhaps been obsessed with flows of people rather than thinking about what is the rhythm of our city. Is there a kind of heartbeat that happens in the city that we need to capture and reflect in the opportunities that we take with this period we call the night? The night can be expensive. Look at the taxi fare regime. Public transport becomes harder to find at night. And I think there's always been a kind of sense that the night is for younger people. Well, maybe it's rather more broader in its generational opportunities and contexts than that. I also think that we and you are kind of obsessed with the urban when we talk about this. And Robbie, you mentioned the rural dance halls. Well, look at your rural communities now. They face the same opportunities and challenges of dealing with the night: smaller resident population, more difficult to find public transport, limited range of commercial assets, limited range of cultural assets, bigger skills and training issues, the rural depopulation you referred to, lower wages. And I know there are people from the tourism industry here. Perhaps they're also challenged by the way in which Ireland goes to the market in the wider world. If you look on British TV now at your press the green button to visit Ireland, I still get lots of cliched images of what culture at night is about in Ireland. So, don't forget the rural. And the rural is giving you in Ireland immense opportunities. Consider the new, work-life balance. There shouldn't be rural depopulation. The rural should be places of desire to live and work. And in the rural, the tourism contribution is probably stronger in terms of local GDP and economic reward than it will be within Dublin, Cork, Limerick or Galway. There's immense changes in the marketplace, which I'll look at now, and in the rural, probably the arts and cultural festivals and events will play a much stronger role than they do within the city environment, where the permanent venues will probably have a stronger role. So I urge you to look at the rural. Very quickly, let's just consider some market trends. Well, post-COVID, it was rather like the predictions that Thomas Burke was making at the height of World War II. Dark, empty streets, curfews, blackouts. Would nightlife ever recover? Well, post-COVID, it has recovered. It is recovering. The joy of nightlife was extinguished during COVID. Post-COVID, recovery is happening. But as you're recognizing with the work that you're doing, but also in other reports coming out of other parts of Europe, then we see this ongoing concern about addressing this issue. Now, COVID did a number of things that are highly relevant to the way you need to move forward. One of the big things that COVID did was to expose the silliness of city marketing and the emptiness of city branding. We're now in a place where residents and your visiting guests are more interested in about the way you behave. It's about reputation management. It's about you in Dublin or in Cork or Galway or Trim or wherever doing the right things for the good reasons. That's really important. Think about your reputation and its management. And increasingly, the younger generation of tourists coming to this island, as well as your residents, will care more. They care more about what you do for them, what you do for your community, the way you treat exploited peoples, the way you pay wages, the way you create employment conditions. They will care. Increasingly, people will visit and respect the places they care about. So kind of underlying all the opportunities that you see coming forward, think about that. And during COVID, we fretted about the new norm. We should have been talking about the new extraordinary. The pandemic precipitated scientific experimentation, for which we're all grateful. It championed innovation, which we need to do more of, and it ushered in a new age of collaboration, challenge, and accelerated change. How much of those elements are you taking on board in moving forward? As a company, we identified 10 major paradigm shifts that we found happening in society in general, but particularly demonstrating themselves within the tourism industry. I'll run through them very quickly. As Robbie said, you can have these slides afterwards. But I want you to just reflect on a few of the words that may trigger something in your thinking. So the first is hybridity. Novel, unique solutions are everywhere. Something that's hybrid very often blurs the edges, makes it very difficult to define. And that brings with it challenges to the institutions that are there to create regulations. So the more we move to hybridity, the greater challenge there'll be to the legislative and the rule makers. Outliers, things that we thought really quirky, left of field, are rapidly becoming mainstream. Co-creation is the watchword of the future. And I don't just mean you working with you, I mean multi-layered areas of collaboration to deliver genuine, storied experiences. And that means codependency has to become a way of working. Lots of people working together to create the hybrid, left-of-field outlier experiences. So transformation, how bold are you willing to be? How elastic can you be? I mean, as an organization, that must be hard for the Arts Council. Much more flexibility, agility, and you have to expect that of the people you work with. There'll be repurposing. Talent will become more important than expertise and skills, and we're all changing the way we interpret value. So what that means is, next 5 to 10 years, unprecedented experimentation. Hybrid solutions by hybrid thinkers. Driving co-cooperation and codependency, which is important within the destination. Be that the 20-minute neighbourhood, be that Dublin city centre, or be that County Clare. Much more working together. Now, this is a little exercise we do as a tourism company in every destination, every town we go to. It's called the Experience Pulse. Do it. Do it when you go on holiday, do it in your own community. It's a simple graph of when you have a really good experience, when you have a low experience. You know, how does that change during the day? And here you see evening economy and the daytime economy, and all the things you do, as you would do on holiday or on a day visit somewhere. Something to eat, somewhere to stay, bit of music, arts gallery. Just plot the pulse. And at the end of that, you should realize how whatever you do, say you're an art gallery, is so dependent on what's happened before and what's happened afterwards. I can have a great experience in this art gallery, and immediately I walk out and go back to where I'm staying, or a restaurant, I have a shite experience, bang. So this idea of codependency, working together, sorting the night out in a co-collaborative way becomes hugely important. And in this, always remember the impact of serendipity. The chance encounter with a local takes you to the right pub, sorry, here's a cliche, a right pub for the right music experience or the right DJ. So the importance of serendipity and the way in which you're all informing each other. So very quickly, opportunities and challenges. Well, I thought it was quite interesting to plot the cycle of our relationship with the night. You know, 1990 through 2010, it was noise, immorality, transgression, deviance, leisure, pleasure. Then new forms of exclusion, gentrification, mass tourism, loss of venues, and so on. And then in the recovery period, about protecting, about legislation, encouraging innovation, and so on. So it seems to me that at this moment in time, the night, however you define it, is buoyant, diverse, varied, cosmopolitan, highly sought after, regularly promoted, but still articulated by fear, risk, crime, anxiety, sentimentalism, especially with your diaspora markets, bar wars and the 5 o'clock flight. And the contemporary world runs counter to these images. Google images and search cities at night, and you'll still get this stuff coming up, promoting Dublin, promoting Dublin. And at the same time, which those images are talking about leisure, pleasure, deviance, transgression. But at the same time, Google images are bringing up these much more positive images about how you're dealing successfully with the night. So why we should care is because change is happening, which means we must care, we must deal with this, we must seek out the opportunities. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this, but I hope this will be useful to you. We've designed 2 ways of looking at the night. The first is the complexity of the power of the night, and the second is the need to think through the dimensions of the night. So, Maureen, I hope this may be useful to you and Robbie and the task force. Start analyzing these different boxes, and then start the reverse activity of thinking about how you can take those elements and turn them into opportunities. And the conclusion of that is that it's not a dark art. Great destinations at night, I think that's kind of after 5 o'clock. It's not when it gets dark, it's that time when most things think about an alternative way of opening and closing. It's not just about nightlife, nightclubs and bars. The night can boast their economic, social, cultural, and place-making reputations. So for me, the night is still full of promise. As long as you think of it as appealing, sustainable, resilient, secure, diverse, inclusive, inspiring, and most importantly, relevant. Relevant to whoever you're talking to. So I'm just going to take you through quickly some of the places that inspire me. That's all I can do. I can't say I recommend them to you. These are places that inspire me in terms of the challenges and opportunities you face. Well, Bilbao. I'll just let the images speak for themselves. But one little statement in there, the right to rest for local people. That's quite an interesting statement. But, you know, most of these images are still about illumination and light animation. But Bilbao still deals with things in a good way. Its public spaces in that period, 5 o'clock till, say, 8 in the morning, are still designed for the people. And interestingly, and this is something you should think about very seriously, they use real-time data to solve issues and problems at night. So Bilbao, the red spots, is where social media, including Instagram, all the Twitter feeds, all the usual stuff, are talking about negative things. So Bilbao Destination Management Organization can see, right, there's a red spot there, what's happening there? In that instance, it was no public transport, build-up of people queuing for taxis, immediate action taken on the phone, taxi company, get people here. So big data plays a very important role in the way you meet the challenges and deal with the opportunities. Turku, in southwest Finland, certainly look at. And they call this group of volunteers who are out there promoting opportunities of the night, the doers. Copenhagen, often referred to, but really good at promoting that 20-minute neighborhood opportunity. Aarhus, also Denmark, worth benchmarking against. Here's perhaps a surprise, Ljubljana, capital of Slovenia. Extraordinary, sustainable, resilient, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week city. Extraordinary range of experiences, extraordinary country. It should be a benchmark for Ireland. Lisbon, I'm sure you're all familiar with. And Linz, Hitler's planned cultural capital. If ever there was a city that had to rise to the challenge of a bad image, it was Linz. In 2000, it was called Linz Stinks. It's a steel town. It was Hitler's armament center. It was a steel town, chemical plants. It was stuck between, it is located on the Danube between Vienna and Salzburg. It had to change. 2009, European Capital of Culture. 2018, one of the UN World Tourism Organization's top 15 cities in the world to visit. A remarkable place which has taken the idea of a 24/7 city to its heart. That's its most recent Tourist Board guidebook. Good Tag, good Nacht. A good day and a good night. And it includes a chapter on how to get the best sex in Linz 24/7 rather than just at night. And there are other examples, all of which you're familiar with, all of which are full of innovation and interest. This one is particularly relevant. It's a new tour of New York, and it's called The Ride. And you sit on a bus. It's a traditional coach tour of what you'd expect to be a coach tour of the city. As you drive around, your seats swing around 90 degrees, and the windows become virtual reality. And if you pass by a theater, stars from the show come out onto the pavement and perform for you, so you're in an alternative venue. So it's taken the venues out onto the streets and deal with this experience in a different way, all day, every day. Okay, I've got a couple of minutes, I think, so some conclusions. And again, as Robbie said, you can have these to look at in detail. But for me, it's not about the nighttime. It's about the way of thinking of your place as a 24/7, 365-degree way. It's not night versus day. It's about looking at all spaces and places within the city. So you're looking to do an audit of venues, but what about those public empty spaces and who owns them? That transition, that physical walk between venue and venue, or restaurant and bar, and then a museum or a gallery, are becoming increasingly relevant to the way in which you think about dealing with these opportunities. Why hasn't the Arts Council of Ireland signed up to the Barcelona Declaration? Better places to live are better places to visit. I'm not saying why you haven't. Why not sign up to the Barcelona Declaration? It sets a set of principles that would be a good umbrella within which to develop the specifics of your challenge. So some lessons that I think come from our best practice examples are there for you to have a read at later. But I think this idea of predictive analytics could become really important to you. Where will demand happen? Where is demand outstripping supply? And can you use big data to actually address that? And also the ethical issues that underpin wherever you stretch the opportunities. You know, the employment conditions, the wage conditions, fairness, the way in which new metrics of success will emerge. And that's your reputation. That goes back to that comment I made about how reputation will become important. So it's not just carpe diem, it's carpe noctrium and carpe diem together. And if there's one place that does this really well around a thread of a narrative, it's the town of Zadar in Croatia. So a town known because of its sunsets. So their approach to developing the 24/7 idea was to take the idea of the sun and its setting and its rise. So new promenade, there it is, bottom left, bottom right for you, new promenade, and within it, it's called the sea organ. So all the organ pipes from churches that were destroyed during the Yugoslav war, 1990s, have set in the promenade concrete. So when the waves come in, it plays tunes. It resonates to the waves. Lovely, great in the daytime. Residents said, can we turn it off at night, please? And so they built the Salute to the Sun. So this round solar panel that you can see, it captures the sun's power during the day, and then at night, it plays a light show dancing to the waves. So you have this lovely thread of the sun being the reason to develop those opportunities that you have. So I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts, that in moving forward, why not think the things that have never been thought of before? Because that's where, hybridity, transformation is going to happen. And if you want to read the work of somebody who will always inspire you, Klaus Sendlinger, the founder of Design Hotels. So why not think the things that have never been thought of before? Because there's a real opportunity, to reconnect. Reconnect the city with its nighttime opportunities, not just the economy, its nighttime opportunities. And I'll share with you this picture of my grandson. Everybody wants to reconnect and be that spaceman. So, look, Jane Jacobs said it all. Let's create a sidewalk ballet, where the nights are as interesting as the day, and the days are as much fun as the nights. If you don't know the work of Jane Jacobs, please read her work. And in doing this, whatever you do in Ireland, all these pop references from the 60s, you don't want to be considered just the best of what you do to solve these challenges. You've got to be the only ones that do what you do. And if you want to read the best book ever written on marketing, read Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. And in dealing with that hour when soft lights come and go, I want you to ask yourselves this question. It's highly relevant. Jeff Beck died earlier this week. And he wrote, will time make man more wise? Now the trees are almost green. When time and tides have been, will you be bolder than you are today? Because somewhere in that boldness lies the real answer to the challenges you're trying to meet. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Terry, for that. That was brilliant. I just want to ask you quickly, like tight enough on time now, but I might ask you 2 questions, maybe compound them slightly into one. Because I thought it was very interesting what you talked about the perception of Ireland and how we present ourselves to tourism markets abroad as well. But also that little point you made at the end in relation to the Grateful Dead about being unique rather than being the best. And I think often we seek international best practice solutions in Ireland and not really recognise what we ourselves have to offer. So I suppose the 2 questions I had was, how is Ireland perceived abroad in terms of our cultural offering, in terms of tourism, and how can we look to the unique ways in which our domestic culture is evolving? I'm particularly considering the kind of Celtic revival that we're kind of seeing in Irish society with bands like Lankum and John Francis Flynn and Maria Somerville and these wonderful artists who are capturing a kind of a new sense of what our Irishness is and sustainably support that through the evolution of our nighttime economy, I suppose. Big question, I'm sorry, Terry.
Well, one, I cannot tell you what to do.
Yes.
Secondly, I have no right to interpret what you interpret as your culture and how that should be portrayed. What I do think is that very often, and I am not pointing any fingers anywhere, but I think very often there is a very strong gameplay to a diaspora market that is playing to sentimentalism, to a set range of perceptions of what Ireland is about. And that comes through not simply in the marketing, that is the role of a particular body, but it permeates across many ways in which, things are. Just, I was reading The Independent this morning, and their description of, the upcoming Six Nations rugby, was like reading something that I would have read about Irish rugby 30 years ago. And I think it's about whatever direction somebody takes, there has to be a collective move in the same direction. Because however powerful you are, there are more powerful influences out there. So in answer to the second bit of your question, I suppose it's your choice, it's your decisions, but unless there's an alignment in the direction of travel, there will always be a stronger presence out there in the outside world than you can ever be. So your influence has almost got to start at home and then hope that there is this snowballing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Effect.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, well, hopefully these forums can offer that kind of platform for those kind of snowballs
Good
to
luck.
start launching off the mountain. Thank you so much, Terry, for that. That was brilliant. Sorry, apologies. Thank you, Terry. Thanks a million. And so, yeah, with that, I think we might move on to our first panel of the afternoon, which is around the opportunities for innovation in the nighttime economy. So I might invite the panelists, Mirik, Michelle, and Sinead, to join me on stage. Thank you very much. Hello. So welcome to the stage. Hello, Mirik.
Hey.
I might get you just to introduce yourselves, first of all. I'm sure you can describe yourselves in much better terms than I can. So, Michelle, we can start with you.
Okay, I knew if I sit beside you that I'd have to speak. That's fine. So, yeah, I'm Michelle Carew, and I'm the Arts Officer with Cork City Council. So, my remit is the development and support of the arts in the city. And in terms of the nighttime economy, and we'll go into that in more detail, there is clearly a very huge opportunity to address some of the strategic goals that we have for arts and culture in Cork through this opportunity, and some very strong points of alignment. So I'm looking forward to talking about some of that.
Cool. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, Sinead.
Great. I'm Sinead O'Reilly, Head of Local Place and Public Art in the Arts Council and the Project Lead for Culture Night. So when Culture Night moved from the department into the Arts Council, it landed on my desk, mainly because I suppose my work involves work with local authorities primarily, and Culture Night has expanded throughout the country through the great work of local authorities making that happen. So since then, we've been working on, I suppose, understanding our role within Culture Night and understanding Culture Night itself, because it is such a huge thing. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from, and I'll be talking about how we've been getting involved in the nighttime economy.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Mirek?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Mirek Milan. I'm based in Amsterdam. I've been a former nightclub promoter. I organized parties all my life, started when I was 20, so I think it's also my journey of that talent development that the night really has. In 2012, I was elected as the night mayor, the nightlife mayor of Amsterdam. I was a direct advisor to the mayor of Amsterdam and the city council. Helped to introduce 24-hour licenses in Amsterdam, but also very much focused on making the inner city, the entertainment district of Amsterdam, making it more safe and vibrant. Really working together with the municipality, but also the business owners and the city residents, because I think that's the holy triangle to improving the nighttime economy.
Amazing. Cool. Thank you so much, Mirek. Sinead, I might actually start with you in relation to Culture Night, which you mentioned obviously is now under the auspices of the Arts Council. So I just wanted to ask you initially about the experience of Culture Night, of expanding Culture Night into evening and late night since the Arts Council has kind of become involved, kind of to start off with.
Okay. Well, I suppose when Culture Night moved over to us, I suppose our DO at the time was keep the ship steady so we can understand really what it was about. And little did we know that there was no such thing as a steady ship from there on in. But we were very much, I suppose, looking in that first year to get under the skin of it and really understand it. So we did embark on a big piece of research it took almost 12 months to get to really, I suppose, survey all the organisers and participants and audiences. And stakeholders, and it's the scale of it is phenomenal. We look at over 1,600 events throughout the country on one night, and I was really interested, in terms of where it began. It began as that Temple Bar Cultural Trust, on the auspices of Dublin City Council in 2006, looking to open up cultural venues late into the night. So it began as is a late night cultural economy piece of an innovation at that time. And over time, I suppose it changed, and as it became national and expanded right across the country, and go back to what Terry said there, it said, be the only ones who do what you do. If you think of Culture Night in Ireland, we are the only ones internationally who have a Culture Night that takes over the whole country. So that is unique. So we are unique in that sense already, and it's good to recognise that. But actually, when we looked into that research, we also realised that when we looked at the last typical Culture Night of 2019, that only 9% of events happened after 9 p.m. Mm-hmm. So it had kind of somehow over time stopped being Culture Night, and the night in Culture Night had become neglected. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, Nighttime Economy Task Force was also underway, and the research that we had done and the insights from that helped form part of that. And since then, so since 2021, we began to open up again. We have really encouraged the Culture Night late, but taking it step by step because it is change. So in 2021, there were 3 flagship events in Dublin, Limerick and Galway, late night events out on the streets, and that went on into the wee hours. And then we also supported about 30 venues to stay open late. We did the same last year, but expanded that with more late night events, so 10 of them in more places around the country. What we really are seeing as well is that those who took part in the late night activity in 2021 were back again in 2022 because they saw
there was a lot of demand.
Yeah, but they saw it was working. They saw it was working, that innovation, that they had not done that before, and what it meant for them in terms of the audience reaction, the engagement with artists, working differently in different places with different people, and they really saw the benefit of that.
I think that's so interesting because again, I think a lot of maybe even younger people's perception of Culture Night is actually it's more about culture evening rather than Culture Night, and that change of because obviously there's challenges for organisers that are involved. So could you speak to some of those challenges that are faced in relation to putting on late night events during Culture Night, and what can we do to address those challenges?
Yeah, so I suppose that there are the challenges that are laid out in the task force report anyway, that they're there in terms of long-term challenges around planning and licensing and noise regulation.
Of course, yeah.
And they're all, can be dealt with in that kind of cooperative way locally. So I think the other challenge is around, the inclusivity and diversity of Culture Night and how we make sure that artists with disabilities and audience with disabilities enjoy the night. Our tagline for Culture Night is one night for all, and that is, it's an ambition, but it's also a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us. If we see that, there is an unrealised potential in having a one night for all, it is up to all of us to really try and make that happen. So there are challenges in lots of different ways. It's not just the kind of physical putting on an event. It is, how do you think about your audience? How do you work with artists that are diverse, and how do we bring in the younger audiences? And we can see now from our research and data that our younger audience profile for Culture Night is growing. It's become, by having those late night events, it's becoming more relevant to them.
So before I go on, I should say there will be a chance for questions from the audience. So as you're listening to us speak about these issues, if there's anything you're thinking about that you'd like to ask a question about, we're going to try and have some time for that at the end of this panel discussion. So please keep those questions in mind, and we would love to get some actual questions from the audience as well, because again, I think even in terms of talking about those challenges, a lot of people in this room are the people who have lived experience of what those challenges are. So those perspectives would be very valuable as part of this conversation. But I suppose as well, something I also wanted to talk about in relation to culture is the kind of the value and opportunities that are afforded to artists through Culture Night and performers as well. And so how can we expand those opportunities within Culture Night, but also beyond Culture Night itself as well, I suppose would be.
Yeah, and we know that there are so many artists who are involved in Culture Night, and in lots of different ways. They're obviously paid to perform and to be part of it, and then there's artists who are part of a collective, opening up their studios, or they're part of a voluntary collective in their communities and trying to make things happen. Through the research we did, we've really, and through our own policy work since, is really trying to advance our Pay the Artist policy and make sure that artists who are invited to be part of Culture Night are being paid and paid appropriately. But if we also look at value in the other sense of how artists might value it, apart from the financial gain from it, is when we research artists, and this, from our most recent survey, we can see that 90% of artists who are taking part in Culture Night recognise that it's opening their work and their up to new audiences. It's opening them up to working with new partners in new ways, in new places. So they're seeing the value of that really clearly in terms of why it's important for them to be involved in Culture Night on the night. But there's no reason why we should just do that on one night.
Yeah, no,
why aren't we doing that in throughout the year?
Yeah, because I suppose that leads me on to my next question. Even is that how do you think we can capture that kind of Culture Night effect? Because there is such an amazing amount of engagement that happens on Culture Night between both audiences and cultural practitioners. And how do you think we can actually capture that effect across the year in a more sustainable way, I suppose?
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we are, researching and are constantly monitoring and the data, so we can learn and share that learning back with organisers. So we also know from that research that 57% of people who are out and about attending a venue or an event on Culture Night are attending that place for the very first time. Now that is phenomenal, and 77% of them want to go back during the year. So I suppose the challenge and the opportunity is there for places to go, actually, well, how can we keep, Culture Night is a night where, people are willing and free to do new things and try new things and experiment. How can we keep them coming back? But how can we be experimental, throughout the year as well? And not just, be experimental on Culture Night and then wait for another year to be experimental on Culture Night again.
Yeah.
And really just,
just the development of those partnerships. I suppose, Michelle, I might bring you in there as well, because I think that kind of ties in to a question I wanted to ask you, because I suppose a lot of those partnerships, typically you find spaces that aren't typically opened up for cultural use being put into use on Culture Night. And from your perspective as an arts officer, obviously, how do you think arts officers and arts offices across the country and local authorities can facilitate the use of non-traditional art spaces for cultural use, particularly in the nighttime economy, I suppose, as well?
That's a good question, and I'll segue in from picking up on something that Sinead was reflecting on there, and your question around what is it that makes what are the elements that make Culture Night a success and how could they be replicated? I think it's important to reflect on the broad mix of opportunities on Culture Night. So it's a broad umbrella that includes arts and opens up arts organisations and institutions, but also there's food tours. There is, in Cork, the Blackrock Castle Observatory opens up, the old Cork Waterworks. So there's a broad range of opportunities and buildings opening up and everything coming under that broad idea of culture that then leads, I think, to a diversity of people in town. And it really creates, Cork City, for example, on Culture Night, the atmosphere is electric and it really changed the tone and the atmosphere of the city centre by the nature of the diverse groups of people who are coming into town and the different things that they're seeing and being opened up to. So I think that's really interesting. And one of the I suppose the planned things to happen around, and we can talk about the nighttime economy pilots in a bit, but is an audit of spaces and venues that can be used up. And I suppose while there are obviously existing cultural venues, there are also venues, etc., in cities and in towns that might be in the way that they're used and opened up under a cultural context on Culture Night. Maybe there's opportunities for that to happen at other times of the year as well. So that's just one way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that audit would be incredibly useful in just having some sort of stock of kind of the spaces that are available to cultural practitioners. But you mentioned as well the buzz around Cork City, and I think that is a really interesting aspect about the public sphere in the terms of the nighttime economy. Obviously, Terry also touched on it in terms of the right to rest and these type of issues that face in people living in these places. So, in terms of the needs of the public sphere and the importance in regards to the nighttime economy, how can we bring cultural activity to that area in a way that is cognizant of those kind of needs and concerns, I suppose, in the public sphere?
Yeah, I think the public realm is really key in this, actually. So, you're coming into town, you're going to places, but also how do you encourage people just to be? That idea of rest is very interesting. And just for the city centre, town centres, to feel safe, to feel welcoming, and to feel like places that all people want to be and that all people can access. So there's a huge piece around animation, around safety, and around the kind of designing these aspects into the public realm. So for example, and Professor Stevens spoke about some of the opportunities that came out of COVID, and one of those being the acceleration of opportunities. And so in Cork, what that meant is we saw the pedestrianisation of 17 city centre streets and a huge investment in outdoor dining infrastructure. That straight away has really changed and opened up a whole year-round, a whole section of the city that maybe previously people were in behind closed doors in those restaurants and bars, etc. Now there's a very marked change in the atmosphere and day to night. There's other modes, I think, in terms of thinking about the art forms that might attract people in or that might have opportunity. For example, later this year we'll be unveiling a trail of 5 new public artworks that due to investment from Fáilte Ireland, but they will be very much within the city centre island, and they are each have light elements as well. So again, they have that interest, and they kind of augment that public space going from day to night and can be experienced in those different ways. So it's thinking like that. And then, and this is kind of beyond the arts piece, but there is also that piece around designing safe spaces and accessible spaces, and even, simple actions like a public lighting audit. What streets are a bit dark to go down? How can you move from one place to the other and feel secure 24/7? And are your streets, is the infrastructure accessible also? So there's, I think the public realm is huge, and this idea of animating the public realm is very core to our strategic arts goals as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think as well about, I suppose, something I wanted to ask you about is kind of the role of the new nighttime advisor, because there's so many issues and kind of very unique problems that are faced within the nighttime economy and the organization of it, and again, making sure that these kind of aspects of it are accounted for. There's a lot of room for conflict and, you know, diverse opinions on what should be happening and what shouldn't. So I wanted to just ask you about the role of the new nighttime economy advisors that have been announced by the Nighttime Economy Task Force, and maybe just even the advantage and the limitations that you might foresee within that role, and also even referencing the difference of settings, because there's like many different settings in which these roles are going to be rolled out, not just in our cities, but also in small towns. So the different needs, I suppose, in those different contexts as well would be something that would be interesting to talk about, I thought.
Yeah, sure. So just to give, for anybody who doesn't know, so Cork City will be one of a pilot of 6, or it might be 9 now. 9, it was originally intended to be 6. It's 9 cities and towns with a population, also some towns with a population of over 10,000, where there will be nighttime economy pilots. And a big part of that is the appointment of nighttime advisors. And their role really is essentially to gather and bring all of the stakeholders together to do the kind of data gathering on the existing nighttime economy, huge amount of consultation, and ultimately then to develop an action plan for the nighttime economy in that location. I actually think the role, in a sense, is the same whether you're in, you're in a rural setting or a city, because ultimately what it is, it's being open, it's listening, it's bringing people together. And what the potential, I think one of the big benefits of this is having a role there that will galvanise all of the different aspects, you know, whether that's arts and culture, retail, business interests, and all of their other aspects, and to kind of galvanise all of that. That's a really exciting proposition that somebody would be there to do that. I think it's interesting that they're situated in the local authority, because we were speaking about this, Merrick, the nighttime mayor in Amsterdam. That's different. It's outside. It's not a role within local government. But I suppose you'll speak more about that. But it's I suppose it's hard to see the drawbacks, to be honest. With it, I think it's hugely exciting, and will be really pivotal to moving this work along.
Yeah, it's room for more official dialogue around these areas, and so that's always that's always a promising thought, I suppose. I think that's maybe a good opportunity to bring you in, and sorry for keeping you waiting, Merrick, but I thought it would be interesting just to present some of the Irish context before we sought your international experience. And I suppose even on that, the idea of the nighttime kind of advisor and the role that they have. I suppose just firstly, just to ask you, what is your perspective on this Irish context as we've kind of presented it, and from an international perspective, where do you see the kind of like some lessons that we can learn?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think there's some very interesting things already mentioned. I truly believe that it's really important to diversify the offering. I think there are many conversations when it comes to the nighttime economy are very much related to the sale of alcohol. And I think we really have to focus on the curated nightlife. I think that is the nightlife that really will give identity to the city or to a region or to a small town. And it doesn't matter really. I'm great to hear that you say over 10,000 inhabitants is already looking at having a nighttime advisor. I think that's super relevant. I do believe that it's important that you need to give people the opportunity to really develop their talents as cultural and creative producers. I really strongly believe that the nighttime economy or late night culture can be a place for talent development for the creative industry, and I think that's such an important role of that the nighttime economy can have in a city. So think of all the DJs, VJs, but also photographers, filmmakers, and of course live musicians, all those people that have been able to develop their talents by playing. The night is also a serious playground. That is where people come together, where they connect with each other, but also where they develop their talents, and then in the end having a daytime job. And that's also my personal story as well. I do believe, and I think that the Culture Night is a really important platform. You have the Museum Night also in the Netherlands. But what we always hope is when we are speaking to mayors or the city councillors, we always hope, how do we make sure that we have that we keep the same amount of creative places in the city? How do we make sure that if one venue closes down, somewhere else a venue opens up? And that is something that we have been advocating for really a lot in the recent years. And that's what we always hope, because maybe when a venue opens up or has been opened up due to Culture Night, that would be a great opportunity to figure out, okay, how do we make sure that this venue gets a permanent license, and not till the end of days, but maybe, I think in the research that we have done in the recent years, you can see that, if a venue has the opportunity to stay open between 3 and 8 years, that really has a huge impact on the creatives that all get the opportunity, as I said, to develop their talent. So that is one thing. How do we, yes, an audit, I think, would be really important. Which kind of spaces are actually out there, which can be maybe transferred, which, hopefully, or maybe formal industrial areas. These are the places that we, when it comes to how we have innovated Amsterdam, the 24-hour licenses that I helped to introduce in Amsterdam, these are all venues that are not located in the city center, they're all on the outskirts. And what was very important for us for the first time, what we looked at, and that is the big innovation that we did, is for the first time, if you want to get this license, we were looking at the cultural and creative program that this venue was producing, instead of just saying, well, is it safe? Do you have 4 walls, a roof, and a bouncer in front of the door? What is actually happening in this space? And so you can really more control and also steer the nightlife or the nighttime economy that you're aiming for, that you don't have an oversupply of just rowdy bars and clubs and that kind of stuff, but that you have a very diverse range of the sizes of the venue, the type of music that is played, or the type of audience that they attract. And I think that was a really big innovation that we did in Amsterdam. And I can come back to the nighttime advisors in a second if you have.
No, that's brilliant. But I think that's a really important thread to pull on. Isn't even if some of the reform that's coming later on this year, there's establishment of a culture.
Yeah, not just give everybody that license that has the ability. Think about, okay, what is the cultural output that this venue is producing, and maybe we should give them the license.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think that's such an important point. And again, it's about looking about, I suppose, the kind of operators in our nighttime economy that clearly have the sale of alcohol is ancillary to their main.
Yeah, just put a tender out and say okay, we're going to give X amount of licenses, and tell us what you're going to do there actually, instead of just saying that you can open up.
Just in terms of that journey, what relationships? Because there's obviously a lot of challenges. There's a lot of different views within the nighttime economy, and again, there's so much diverse interpretation. We talked before this chat about the need to kind of develop a shared vocabulary about what we're talking about. Because even when you're talking about a nightclub, let's say in an Irish context, there's an interpretation of that which is domestic, but then there's an international interpretation which is completely different, and we don't really have much of a lived experience. So I suppose, where do you see those challenges emerging, and what important relationships do you think that there are in terms of overcoming those challenges?
Well, still the night is surrounded by this dogma, of course, of it's nothing ever good happens after midnight, and I think, of course, that is the first step that we need to take. But it's also about coming together. What I said. I think one of my big accomplishments was, of course, together with the mayor of Amsterdam, we managed to get down alcohol-related violence and alcohol-related violence by 20% and reports of nuisance by 30% in one of our most busiest nightlife districts. So these are real numbers politicians, of course, love. But we also were able to make the area more culturally vibrant, because we also extended the opening hours, and we also looked at what kind of program is taking place in these venues. So what are some challenges to overcome is to really better understand what each other's needs are. Because really often, and you mentioned, Michelle, you mentioned lighting. One of the big things that we did in this project was we managed to get on this square, there's this really big, well, I don't want to say Times Square, but it's this LED screen. And we managed to get down the intensity of the screen. We managed to get it down by 60%, because a lot of people were coming out of the music venues late at night, and And it was actually the lighting actually made the sphere, the atmosphere less pleasant to be in. And that also caused a lot of conflict. So it's very much about sitting down together, having a multi-stakeholder approach, trying to listen to each other and trying to find out who are these operators that are really willing to listen to the concerns and the needs of also your city residents. And also having a city government or a mayor or the system runs a little bit different here, I understood, but the authorities saying, okay, we want to move forward, but we want to do it in a safe and properly manner. So yeah, changing the narrative is essential in understanding what the value is.
Brilliant, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm aware we could go into this and we could probably sit up here all day and chat about this, but I do really want to bring in the audience, and if there's any questions, if you just want to raise your hand, and then I hope somebody will be able to get to you with a microphone. But is there any questions from the audience? I think Sunil there.
No way. I think you have to wait till you have the microphone.
Sorry.
I saw some more hands also behind that.
Sorry,
as well.
it'll be a quick one. This is primarily to Mirek, actually. I think we don't have a problem with culture, the creative culture, and the people that create culture here in Ireland. The problem is the culture of authority and red tape. Would you be able to describe how you improved the relationship and your situation with nightlife and authorities, particularly the planning department in the council in Amsterdam? Did you have direct communication with people in the planning department and also other senior management when you were helping to develop 24-hour licenses?
Yeah, and I think this also relates back a little bit to your question. Like, if you're, I think also the freedom that like so there. At the moment, there are already more than 70, and I hear maybe even if there's 9 cities joining, then we will soon have probably more than 100 cities that have adopted this a nighttime office or a nighttime strategy. I think what's really important, like if you're, for example, like we were outside of city government, that gives us the ability to speak to the mayor, to speak to the city councillors, to speak to different political parties, to find support at all ends, to as you're saying, to go to the planning department and to discuss with them, hey, which areas in the city are you developing in the coming years? Because the night can be very much a driver for regeneration, can be a driver for area development. And I think that was really one of the biggest advantages, that we were able to speak to all the different departments, find out what their needs are, what they wanted to achieve, and then trying to align all the needs of the operators, etc. And with the 24-hour licenses, so these venues are not located in the city center. They're only in the outskirts, in the area that still can be developed, in areas where there's less where there's less opportunity of the disturbance and nuisance. And I think, I think that is really, and also in the previous keynote it was also mentioned, is really about finding that collaboration and finding the sweet spot, and also figuring out, okay, how can we change the rules, or how can we bend the rules so that we that we can plan for a positive outcome.
Brilliant. There's a hand just behind you there, Sunil. Sorry, just if you want to pass the mic over, that'd be great.
Thank you, and thank you to the speakers, and thank you, Sir Neil. That's what the transcription called him earlier on. Willie White, I work for Dublin Theatre Festival. I'm also on the SPC and Dublin Strategic Policy Committee that concerns culture. I'm also a council member of Dublin Chamber, so I cross lots of different views on the city. I don't want to actually ask a question, I want to make a statement. At least I know the difference, and I won't go on too long. We have a huge problem in the city with infrastructure. Maureen referred earlier on to the massive increase in investment from the Arts Council. That happened overnight, but you cannot supply the infrastructure that has been stripped away in the last 20 years overnight. So that's something we have to start working on now. I know that it's not just Dublin, and I know it's not just the city centre, but I'm speaking specifically about Dublin city centre. We also have the image problem created by things like Primetime, which is a current affairs programme for people not here, that make Dublin city centre not only look like a place with no infrastructure, but a kind of a terrifying place to be after night. And I'm not interested in slagging off Dublin City Council, but I want to say some things that are in the public domain as an indication of how much better the relationship with, not the Arts Office, between the executive of Dublin City Council and artists and the cultural community can work. I suppose what Give Us the Night has largely been about licensing. That may be addressed with the SEOs being cheaper. There's also a planning issue. People talk about meanwhile use. Meanwhile use doesn't really exist at all. But at the same time, the aforementioned Lankin were calling out the City Council from the stage at Vicar Street last December. We've had artists from Richmond Studios protesting outside the city offices. You mentioned Culture Night. It was a really fantastic event in many ways in the fruit market, which has been vacant for years, and people have been faffing about what's going to happen with it. But there was a very high awareness of health and safety in the presentation at that event. There were crash barriers all over the place, and this is an alcohol-free event, and people in reflective jackets all the way up to Cable Street, because somebody had mentioned a few weeks before there was going to be a rave, which doesn't connote what it did in the 1990s. So the City Council has gone from having raves in the Mansion House in the late 80s to being terrified of the prospect. So that relationship needs work.
Yeah, fully agree with that. Yeah. We have a hand up here at front. Sorry, could I ask the audience members, please, to pass the microphone along as best they can? Sorry. Just right up the front. Yeah, and even yet, I think that's such an important point, even to continue what you're saying, Willie, as well, is like, I think there was a real juxtaposition from my perspective as well in terms of the organisation of Haunted Dance Hall and how that was presented and how the fruit market, as you said, was presented. It is a real culture shift that needs to happen. Sorry, now, thank you very much. Saturn.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Could you introduce yourself?
Sorry, my name is Saturn Wolflow. I have recently done the Rock for Culture movement, which was to help save Fibbers being demolished from another hotel. And I'm an activist within the community and been in the arts, I guess, collective for nearly 20 years. We have had two venues I'm going to name, Magruder's and Radio City, sitting dormant for almost a decade now. How does that make you feel? What do you think should have been done with them? And what do you think we should do going forward?
Does anybody on the panel want to address this? I suppose that even to make it a more general case, I suppose we're talking about venues that are just sitting vacant, and even the use of these kind of properties and bringing them into cultural use, if there's any perspectives on that.
Well, I might just mention something that's in the task force report, and it's there to be actioned as well around that kind of meanwhile use of spaces, so spaces that are maybe were never used for the arts, but could be used temporarily for the arts, or could be brought back in temporarily for use. That's something that should be looked at and could be looked at. But I suppose that some of those are maybe local issues as well, so maybe it depends on the context as well for a lot of that. That kind of question, I think, as well.
It kind of, I suppose, there's like, and it touches on some of the stuff that we were talking about, Michelle, in relation to, the dialogue that could happen between arts offices and the planning sectors of our local authorities, and how that can maybe be more constructive to kind of consider these type of problems that we face in our urban landscape, I suppose.
Yes, I suppose...
Even, sorry, to ask a more specific question, because it's very, very wide-ranging and we do only have a minute left. Is there much dialogue, or what is the dialogue between those two kind of sectors of the local authority, I suppose?
The short answer is yes, there is dialogue, and the other slightly longer answer is that they're not necessarily just two sectors either. So I suppose within planning, and I'm no authority on planning, I think it is a very complex, which we don't have time to go into in 30 seconds, factor in all of this. Planning is a big matter in all of this. There is a complex kind of balancing of powers between national and local. And in many cases, local authorities are implementing national planning policy as well. So I suppose the arts offices and local authorities and have a real opportunity, and we do, particularly, I know I can only speak on behalf of Cork City Council, we do engage a huge amount. So for example, city planners would be very engaged in a process which we use to develop our arts and culture strategy, which was really about putting arts and culture in Cork City on the development agenda. So keeping that on the development agenda is really important in terms of engaging with planning policy, and that really looks to the long term. And then planning management is the piece that is implementing planning legislation, and that's licensing, etc. And there's a huge role there as well. So it is complex and there are challenges, but conversation is really key, and people like arts officers can have internal conversation, advocate internally. And I do think the nighttime economy advisors, having them situated within the local authority to have those conversations, to make those engagements, and to create understanding actually with all the stakeholders in the cities and towns will be really valuable.
Okay, brilliant. I think that's amazing. Thank you so much to all my speakers. So, yeah, I hope that inspires you. We're gonna take it might be around 15-minute break now at this stage, and there are soft drinks and water that are going to be provided in the courtyard located on ground level, one floor up, and the next session will begin at 3:45 p.m. sharp, so please be back in the room for that. Thanks so much. All of a sudden. Anyway, Terry, thank you very much. Welcome back, guys. I'm just going to introduce the chair for our next panel, who will then go on to introduce our panelists. But our chair for the next panel is Ruth McGowan, who is the Artistic Director and CEO of Dublin Fringe Festival. Dublin Fringe Festival seeks out and presents contemporary, playful and provocative new work in an annual celebration all over the city each September. It is a platform for new and emerging artists in Ireland to showcase their work and offer artists at every stage of their career an opportunity to challenge, subvert and invigorate their disciplines and practice. The festival plays a vital role in Dublin's cultural life, extending the possibilities of what art can be and where it happens. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ruth and the panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Robbie. And I'm really delighted to be here having this conversation. And I'm going to invite the panel to introduce themselves and their work. But before I do that, I just wanted to share, I guess, the invitation that's been made to the five of us of the conversation that we're going to have in the next half hour. So at Dublin Fringe Festival, we champion art made after dark. We recognise that nighttime venues are essential places for artistic experimentation and for the alternative, creating space for the alternative. I work really closely with artists whose work needs after dark context to thrive in. So comedians, musicians, DJs, drag artists, cabaret artists, the list goes on. And the conversation always kind of begins and ends. It always comes back to venue, finding the right atmosphere for the work to meet an audience. So historically, artists and the venues where they can perform and the places where they can build community have been essential to the soul of a city or a town, to the soul of a city or a town's nightlife, and especially one as talent-rich as Ireland is. And most contemporary conversations about space usage will quickly point to venues that can be very nimble, that can have a multiplicity of uses at different times of the day as a linchpin to a healthy nighttime cultural ecosystem. And cultural venues and arts organisations are chameleons. As placemakers, they're very invested in maximising the social impact in their local area as well as artistic impact. And they're very practiced in flexibility, hosting a real variety of stakeholders and no 2 days being the same. So I'm here with three colleagues who represent arts venues and cultural spaces across the country, and with Emily, who's a jazz artist and an activist who works in a spectrum of different venues. And I'm going to invite them to share their recent experiences in creating and in hosting work made for nighttime contexts. And the hope is that by sharing their successes and their learnings, we can all be as imaginative and as open and as useful as possible in our strategies to support artists and to improve the quality of life for everyone who works at night. So we're going to talk for about half an hour, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions because there's loads of great expertise in the room, and we'd really love to hear from you if you have a question. So first off, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves and their work. So, Cara, if you wouldn't mind starting, just tell us about you and your organisation and share some of the context about the role that nighttime culture plays in your work.
Okay, well, my name is Cara Trent. I'm director of Kerry Writers Museum. We're based in Listowel in County Kerry, obviously. And we're a community-owned and operated museum, and we celebrate and honour the literary heritage and tradition of our county, but in particular, I suppose, writers of our immediate area like John B. Keane, Brendan Kennelly, Brian McMahon, But we also support and nurture future generation of writers. We, through programs like our creative writing workshops, readings, book launches, things like that. And we also operate the Fighting Words creative writing program in County Kerry, which was established, as you probably know, by Roddy Doyle, going back in Sean Love, maybe 12 years ago or so. So we're delighted we took on that role a few years ago. We're also a cultural and heritage centre, I suppose, promoting, honouring, highlighting the rich traditional cultural heritage of our region, particularly traditional arts, traditional music, song, dance and storytelling. And I suppose in terms of a nighttime economy, I suppose that's where we come into our own in terms of events. Listowel is probably an unusual town in that we also have a separate theatre and arts centre. We do St. John's Theatre and Arts Centre. We do work well together and collaborate together. So we focus more on our local heritage and our traditional heritage. And since, I suppose, we opened nearly 20 years ago, we've always ran a monthly rambling house. And as Robbie mentioned, the dance houses of long ago, the rambling houses, particularly in rural Ireland, were informal gatherings where people went to each other's houses to sing songs, tell stories, and spend the night before modern technology kicked in. So that has seen a bit of a revival in recent years, and we've been running one in the museum for, as I said, maybe nearly 20 years now. And they're very informal gatherings. So this year we looked at and we were made aware of the nighttime economy scheme that was introduced by the department there during the year. And we looked at the fabulous professional artists, traditional artists, spoken word artists, theatre practitioners in our area. And we thought, wouldn't it be nice to have an event or a session to bring those in and to perform to our audiences. So we established the Rambling Sessions. So we ran a 10-night programme over 10 weeks during September and October called the Rambling Sessions as part of the Nighttime Economy Scheme. So that's, I suppose, where, you know, we're here now today for.
Brilliant. Yeah. Looking forward to hearing more about that. And Emma?
I'm Emma Nee Haslam. I'm the manager at Burr Theatre and Arts Centre in Offaly. We are the only venue in Offaly at the moment, until this year. And later this year, Tullamore will be opening Esker Arts Centre, which we're looking forward to working with them as well. Burr is a population of about 5,000 people. Our venue is located in a very old building. It was built as a theatre 130 years ago. We now seat 220 people and have lots of activity of about 140 events throughout the year, and we see about 14,000 people through our doors each year for a selection of music, theatre, film, and all that in between. We're also heavily involved in 5 festivals in the town as well, so that certainly keeps us busy. Our activity would be predominantly evening and nighttime, and particularly October to May would be the busier times. So we certainly took the opportunity when the Nighttime Economy Support Scheme call out came out to use it to develop our June to September programme. And just as the timeline worked, it worked out that we were able to run a four-week series of women in comedy, and that's very different to what we usually might do. We might have 1 or 2 comedy acts a year, but to do it in a series and to promote it and market it in a series, it worked out quite well for us, and it was timely. I suppose we had come out of COVID, we had a slow start to the year, and we wanted to get our autumn season kick-started and underway a little bit sooner, so that certainly afforded us that opportunity as well to be able to do that. So yeah, delighted to be here, to be part of the conversation.
Thanks a million. Fintan, I'm going to come to you next, and then Emily last, because you've got your slides. So, okay. Fintan.
So I'm Fintan MacDonald. I'm the Head of Corporate and Commercial Services at IMA, the Irish Museum of Modern Art. So last year, IMA celebrated 30 years of its existence in the fine setting of the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham. So traditionally, kind of IMA as a gallery of contemporary and modern art, is something that has just operated, from 10 o'clock to 5:30 p.m. and closes then. So often after that time, there's no one there but dog walkers. And a lot of the activity historically has been contained within the gallery walls. So when COVID came, we brought forward some of the plans we'd been thinking about, which was to activate the grounds more. We've got 48 acres, but to start introducing performance art and to welcoming the community into the grounds. So we established the IMA Pavilion out front, and that IMA Pavilion became a centre during COVID for community meetings, for performance art, for artists to come along and to take advantage of the space, to have talks, lectures, yoga, kids groups, art classes. So we began to activate a whole outdoors program, which was branded as IMA Outdoors. And as we extended that, so last year we extended that to include as well our pilot scheme for the IMA Eco Festival, which was called Earth Rising. So it was a whole weekend of artists and other performers coming along to I suppose, to show their interventions in how they are trying to bring culture and art together with initiatives they're taking in the face of the environmental crisis that we're facing. So we had 71 artists and a whole host of performers over a whole weekend welcoming in engaging with the public in a completely free event. And we had 9,000 people attended over the weekend. That happened in October last year. It was the start of future things. But then with the nighttime economy, what it allowed us to do is further extend all of this programming into the evening time, which hasn't been part of IMA's tradition. So we had a whole event called Continuous Patterns. There was a whole evening of art, a whole weekend of art and music events at one weekend in July. And then also all the way from May through to September, we had evenings. So every Thursday and Friday evenings, we had a series of performances from artists. So artists were able to come along and do their thing in front of an audience that IMA was able to bring along. And some of those things, they ranged from small events in the galleries where the artist would be in a gallery talking to with an intimate group of visitors, to large music events that took place kind of in the beautiful IMA courtyard. So we had 65 events over the course of the summer, being more than 8,000 people. So we were delighted with this to be part of this project.
Loads to talk about there too.
Yes.
Emily, would you like to introduce your practice also?
Thank you very much. You brought up the slides, great. Hello everybody, my name is Emily Conway and I'm a vocal jazz artist, among other things. And I suppose the fact that I'm here, because I have a disability, says that you're really serious about knowing and including us. Well, it's about time. It's about time disabled people shine. Replace tokenism and disposability with accessibility sustainably. Oh, isn't it time? It's our time. It's our time, because we are artists, directors and policy makers, assist front of house and backstage, porters, cleaners. We're hecklers and hackers, hangers on and hellraisers. We're dancers, designers, has-beens and whiners. We're actors and acrobats, clowns and accountants, stunt fighters, lighting crew, audio describers, producers and ambitious administrators, sopranos, baritones, sound engineers, applauded and heinous, derivative and genius, aesthetic, pathetic, celebrated, star-rated. Isn't it time? It's our time. It's our time. Okay. Thank you. So, as a vocal jazz artist myself, the pandemic was difficult for everybody. I think for disabled people, it's hard to even classify how difficult it was. And so what I say is that the art's precarious with a disability, it's precarity squared. So circumstances conspired to basically pushing me to speak up about. The next slide, please. Yeah. As I'm going on in my career, I'm looking, where are the other disabled artists like me? So next slide. So the precarity squared, what are the barriers? So as you can see there, the barriers are first of all the limits of our disabilities, you know, sensory, so mine is sight. I also have an intermittent hearing problem. Those are the limits. Now, we're not born on the planet necessarily accepting them, and we live in a world and a society that doesn't make it easy to accept difference because it locks you out, it tends to exclude. but we usually do all come to some acceptance and actually find the wealth and the dearth of creativity that does really, as far any disabled artist I know, it informs their practice and brings something really different and revolutionary. So we have that knowledge of how to work with our disabilities. So that doesn't have to be a barrier. The next one is, of course, the attitudinal. So that's where ableism or the stereotypes or the assumptions around disability lead people to make conclusions about what we can and can't do. Again, we know what we can do. Integrate us, and we will show you. Then there's the environmental or the physical. So that's where, like, something certainly in the nighttime economy for me as a visually impaired person is there's a real emphasis on cool, streamlined, a lot of glass. There's very little like yellow lines to show this is the end of that, this is where a step is, stuff like that. And of course, for wheelchair users as well, that's a big, big problem and really limits the performance spaces. But I'm also thinking of, part of my career depends on the fact that, like, for example, I don't have Crohn's, so I can go to a jazz club with a dodgy, toilet facilities, that it's okay. But so I think, expanding accessibility and the ideas of what that means really needs a broad voice from the disabled and chronically ill community. So that's the environmental, and then of course the systemic barriers are where, if somebody earns over 140, I think it changed, or it will change to a massive 160 on top of their 203 disability allowance, they start to lose their disability supports. So this is actually, it sort of discriminates among disabilities because a lot of disabled people cannot afford to lose the supports that their life depends on. So, and that also goes for if you win an Arts Council award as well. So these are the barriers. So what can we do about them? Next slide, please. The next is to, and I won't read this out, but anybody, the slides will be available. But this is, we can implement universal design. And, ideologically, I think universal design sets out a really good pathway of how to think about it. How do we do this? We also need to implement, next slide, please, the UN CRPD, particularly Article 30, which is about not only audiences, but also artists, that we level the playing field so that people with disabilities or chronic illness can participate at the same level of everybody else who doesn't have a disability. So again, that's Article 30 from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And then next slide, please. How to do it? Involve us. It's lovely that we're here today. We need to be here on a much more sustained, consistent basis. And there's my model there for how to make it work, which is representation at all levels of the organisation, arts workers, everything. Then documentation, we need to set up a system of reporting and consulting and sharing so that every organisation, every initiative has a repository of knowledge. How do we do this? And it's a living, breathing, responsive piece of knowledge. Do you know what I mean? And then the last thing is we need support, because I know amongst my disabled colleagues, we're often sort of placed in the role of kind of whistleblower or like pointing out, and like emotionally, every way, that's really, really hard to be in that position because you're actually trying to develop your career artistically, and complaining doesn't really endear you. So we need support, just to acknowledge that is actually a factor that we have just by virtue of having a disability. And we have seen throughout that task forces work. So I have been calling on the Arts Council and the Department of Culture to please, please, please let us set up a task force of disabled artists and arts workers to be, again, flexibly threaded through every decision, every initiative, every idea, responding and modifying and, in that way. And then the last point that I have there is just about an idea about a sort of accessibility declaration, which would be, I got the idea from the Michelin stars, then you know what to expect if you get to go to a Michelin star restaurant, but that it could be graded in terms of, okay, this organization has the gold star, it has disabled people working there, you know what I mean, it's very integrated, and it has the whole menu of access requirements. down to, you know, the most fundamental and accessible toilet. And I have, through my research, discovered that there is actually an integrated company in the UK who have this implemented, and it works really well, and they are actually licensing it. So I would be very enthusiastic for us to work with them to implement the same kind of scheme here in Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for bringing all those ideas and all that knowledge into the room, and just to say that it's on all of us to bring that knowledge and those ideas out of the room, and for all of us to be doing that work and to not leave the advocacy to you and to other artists with disabilities. So thank you so much for raising all of that. Really appreciate it. So Emma and Cara, both of you talked about the nighttime programming that you did last year, perhaps being something bigger or different than what you would normally program. And can you talk a little bit about the impetus, that what made you decide to do something a bit different and to move into that space? And then also what the impact was. So did it allow you to work with artists that you wouldn't normally work with, or did it draw new audiences or new partners to your organisation?
Yeah, well, yeah, so why, I suppose, we had, as I said earlier, we had come into 2022 and things were slow, and then you hit the summer and it's slower, and you're like, oh my goodness, where's our audience gone? And this fear that, oh my goodness, we're losing our audience. And you know, we were very aware that we were starting from a ground zero again, because we had 2 years or so without them. Where were they and who were they? So as we were going through July and August, we had been, June, July, we had been looking at, well, okay, let's diverse a little bit and maybe look at comedy and see where that's going. And things were timely actually for us when this funding became available, because we really didn't have the capacity at that time to be able to offer artists guarantees a performance fee, which we kind of felt, well, we really need to be doing that. So artists weren't particularly taking a risk when we were taking a risk. And we welcomed the opportunity, I suppose, just to try to test drive something and see, will this work for us? Using the opportunity of a series, which when the call came out first, I was, oh God, how are we going to do this? But actually, we embraced that, and our marketing department, one person, our marketing department, sound huge, were you know, quite excited about that too, because, well, now we can build a brand and build everything all around this series. So we certainly would be encouraged going forward, having trialled a 4-week period, and 4 weeks or 6 weeks, you know, whatever, every second month or whatever. But yeah, that was actually worked quite well for us. We'd be really encouraged going forward to maybe examine other programs, not necessarily comedy, I wouldn't rule it out. You know, we could go jazz. We could. So yeah, and to explore different art forms and different options. But the series thing worked quite well for us, so we were good with that work.
Brilliant. Yeah. And how about in Listowel?
Well, similar to what Emma said there, like 2022 began as a challenging year, and as a, you know, a tourism venue as well, you know, particularly relying on overseas visitors. You know, we were worried about, you know, getting that audience back, and while it was coming back slowly and surely, we just wanted to, you know, try and maintain our domestic audience, well, our local audience. So, and the fact that we had established that sort of connection with the Rambling House tradition, we said that's the way we'd go. We were probably very ambitious at a 10-week programme again. Wow. So, yeah, well, go big or go home, as they say. No, it started off slow. Yeah, it certainly did. And but audiences, you know, they built up like anything. You know, it's getting that word out there. And like by week 5, we were getting full houses, and we were getting, what was great, we were getting new audiences from different parts of not just the county, but the region. We're quite close to Limerick and even North Cork and things like that. So people were travelling, which was great. Yeah, so, and like at the end of it, people were asking, so when is the next session starting? So hopefully this year we'll try and get something else going. I think one of the things we learned as well is good to collaborate with other organisations. I mentioned St. John's Theatre there and my introduction, but also some of the the public houses in Estole receive support under the nighttime sports scheme. And we worked together in cross-promoting each other, ensuring that we weren't clashing with each other, you know, sharing information on artists and our advice and things like that, which was great. And obviously for a small town, and you know, you need to do that. Like Emma, we've a population of 5,000 in the Estole, so you know, the more we work together as opposed to compete with each other, I think it lifts us all. From that point of view, you know?
Yeah, and I think that cross-industry partnership is really important when, like, coming into that nighttime space, that it's about asking the expertise and bringing in the partnership of other people who've perhaps been working in that space for longer, you know, and other industries that it touches as well. And so, Fintan, Imma's ethos is to be radically public. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and also how your nighttime programming maybe serves that ethos?
Great. Imma traditionally had an audience that would come to a contemporary gallery. But we're conscious that we're serving a community, and it's a local community. But also we're serving kind of there are a lot of people who kind of come by Imma, or who potentially could come by Imma, who mightn't feel comfortable to come into the gallery spaces of Imma, because they mightn't have familiarity with that. So really what the idea of being radically public is to investigate all of those audiences, to look at how art can be brought to people and be made accessible to people in as broad a way as possible. So therefore, so what we try and do is look at each of those individual audiences. And some of them, particularly with the nighttime economy, by having a series of evening and outdoor and evening performances in a beautiful setting of the Imma Courtyard, which is a great musical but also kind of a relaxing setting. Is a place that people can come into, and it gives them an introduction kind of towards the gallery spaces, an introduction towards contemporary art. And to give another little example of it, we did this fantastic performance for Culture Night, which is was by an artist called Ilan Patold, but it's called Night Shift, but it brought people on a train, like a ghost train, around the grounds of Imma, and it portrayed really, I suppose, the artworks, the statue work that are in the grounds of Imma in an eerie, in a ghostly setting kind of late at night, and that ran till 2 o'clock in the morning. And we wouldn't probably have done that without the initiative of this programme.
Okay, brilliant. And I think we all know that, like, different craftspeople need different kinds of tools. Everyone, whatever their work is, they need a different kind of workplace. So artists need all different kinds of venues to work in. You need places for the kind of transgressive and the experimental to thrive, but also like big stages to celebrate artists of note. And Emily, could you speak a little bit about, as an artist who's performed in all kinds of contexts, the importance of that range of venues, of different kinds of venues, and how the venue can maybe give certain advantages or certain limitations on the work that an artist would make?
I think it's absolutely crucial. And again, if we're, considering disability, being able to work in the smaller venues and develop and experiment is how you work up to the bigger ones, And like certainly as a jazz vocalist, I mean, there is actually no accessible jazz venue in Ireland that I'm aware of. There's none in Dublin. So that means by virtue of that you are restricted to working in, lovely, quirky, up-windy staircases, places, but they're the way we say with women, like, if you can see it, you can be it. I mean, we're excluding whole audiences who, for example, won't be able to come to see me in Arthur's, which is lovely, but it's not accessible. So, for that reason, I have tended to book in the concert hall in the John Field Room. Now, that's accessible and it's great, and I know it's safe for people to come, and it's actually it's easier for me with the backstage. Everything works very well there. So I think for general accessibility as artists and audience, it works. But, that's a huge financial risk that you take on as an independent artist, which I'd be scared to do after the pandemic. But, I mean, they're just crucial. And I suppose,
we really need, again, this is where I think, you know, a task force of disabled artists could really help, because we really need to get creative about how we do that on an equal scale for disabled artists, so that little disabled children can come to gigs and say, okay, this is actually a possibility for me, do you know? I think partnerships could be something where maybe you don't have some things accessible in a venue, but maybe you have something next door or something. Do you know, and I think actually that ties into what I was saying about the Michelin stars, because from what I understand in the company in the UK, they have this kind of partnership system built into their accessibility declaration structure. So yeah, a few ideas there.
Brilliant. And I think conversations about the nighttime economy and nighttime culture at a national level, they often centre on cities. And I just wondered, in Birr and in Listowel, what are the successes that you're seeing in terms of nighttime industry, or any particular challenges that you feel are not being represented that are different from those that are being talked about in cities?
Well, I know in Listowel there's a number outside of venues like ourselves in St. John's. There's a number of new initiatives. For example, the old ball alley in the town has been converted, and I know St. John's Theatre has organised a number of nighttime events, beautiful outdoor space. You know, looking at new spaces, we just pre-pandemic, a local artist started a Festival of Light in Listowel, and hopefully that'll be back again this year, using the town park as the main stage as a venue. And even ourselves, we're looking at we're on the doorstep of Listowel Castle, which is an OPW site. Now the castle only opens from May to September. But they have a lovely amphitheatre space right outside our doors, so we're looking at we've used it in the past, but using it more now. Obviously, it's very weather dependent, a lot of those, but still, I think, you know, there are spaces there. I mean, it doesn't have to be maybe created in the new, using facilities, particularly in rural areas where you mightn't have that infrastructure, or you might have the resources to develop the infrastructure, but look at the old spaces that are there, the spaces that aren't being used, and you know, consider those as venues for nighttime events. And what was the second, was there a second element to your question? Sorry.
No, you've answered it. And just if there were any, I guess, the challenges that are going on perhaps in Listowel that are not being talked about or are different from the challenges in cities.
Well, I suppose the obvious challenge is rural depopulation and your audience size, you know, and transport, you know. Obviously, you can't rely in a small rural town, you can't rely solely on a local audience, but how do other audiences get you? I mean, we don't have a train service, we have a public transport service, but that stops at a certain time, you know, so, or we have a bus service, I should say. So, yeah, so they're the obvious ones in any rural space. Staffing can be an issue as well. I suppose it's an issue across the country, but getting staff for your venue is an issue as well. But there's just a few to mention.
Brilliant. And also, just I suppose, just going back to the variety of venues, and certainly in Birr we have explored all sorts of options, from the churches to the library, and in the last 2 years Birr Municipal District has invested in geodomes. So we've had these outdoor spaces that indoor spaces that we can use, and they can be erected at any numerous different areas in the town. So we're starting to grow and programme those particular domes as well for workshops and performances. And during our festival week last week, there was lots of activity in them. And also we're looking at developing the old courthouse, which had been in court services domain for a long time. It was closed and run down, and there's been recent investment in that building. But the beauty of that, it's not just an indoor space. There's a great yard space outside as well. So again, that's bringing more activity that, you know, people just see a theatre and arts centre. Well, it's not, it just doesn't happen there, it happens in other parts. And of course we have the great advantage of Birr Castle and the gardens of Birr Castle as well to be able to knock at the door and to use. But certainly, just to agree with you in relation to the challenges, yeah, public transport certainly would be one, and public safety as well. You know, Birr Town are working with Fáilte Ireland to be a designated destination town. And at the moment investment is in public realm, but certainly the theatre will have a place to play in that in the future when it comes to programming during the night time.
lots of shared challenges
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think it's, what I hear from everybody is just it's about really maximising what you have and working with what you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'm sure there's lots of questions in the room, so just to open up to the floor to see if anyone would like to ask a question. I see your hand was the first that I saw here in the middle. Mic's on the way.
So comedy is a performance art. When I say comedy, I mean stand-up, sketch and improv. Thank you very much. In 2020, the Irish Comedy Safety Standards was set up to provide a safe nightlife for comedy with training provided by the DRCC. So arts resources are competitive and we appreciate that. We're just looking for a seat at the table for financial and non-financial supports. So the arts was decimated during COVID, but our performance counterparts have the funding and supports to bounce back. Dublin Fringe does programme stand-up comedy, but we need other supports. The comedy sector feels excluded. Comedy needs allies and it needs recognition. So maybe this is an open question, but how do we envision including comedy like its performing counterparts?
I suppose, Emma, you talked about what programming comedy offered to audiences, perhaps it would offer something new. Did you get any particular pieces of audience feedback or anything you were very encouraged?
Yeah, what encouraged us, I suppose, particularly in relation to comedy, was, you know, because our experience has been mixed. It depends, you know, if you're the big headline act, well, you know, we know we're going to fill a house, but that's not necessarily what we were after for this particular programme, but we wanted to strike a balance, so did a mix, but certainly our very positive feedback, because one of them was my first time in the venue, I'll definitely be back. We're like, great, okay, come back for everything. So and that was good to hear, and that particular series that we did was on a Thursday night. Again, something out of the ordinary for us, and probably did it off-peak. In our opinion, that was off-peak, but actually, maybe it's not off-peak. Maybe there actually is demand for a lot more activity on a Thursday night in Birr. So, yeah, we're willing to try that out.
And, sorry, did you want to say again just your organisation and where people can get in touch with you? Irish Comedy Guide, brilliant. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
It's more of a statement than a question. Once again, Saturn Wolflow here. I'm also the founder of Dance at the Doll, which I've been told by many people is the reason why we got the curfews and the restrictions lifted after COVID. I'm a disabled artist myself. I've missed 4 shows in 2022 due to this, and I cannot apply for the council's bursary in fear of losing my disability or dismal disability allowance. As someone who was not born with these ailments but was momentarily reduced to a wheelchair in 2022 and awaiting a spine surgery, it's become extremely vivid to me, or has become extremely vivid to me, how there is little to no access to artists or punters with disabilities in the lack of venues we have left. I'd like to back what Emily said and second that a team of disabled people should be implemented into every decision going forward, and think the only reason this can't happen tomorrow is the privileges of your ableism making you lazy and taking the easy road to avoid the effort of inclusion. When there is no effort at all, so all you have to do is drop the stigmas and bring those who need better accessibilities into the discussion now and make everything going forward better and equal for all. We got an extra $2 million in the budget, more than enough to set up the first venue to be totally inclusive and set a benchmark globally for the arts.
Thanks a million for that comment. Thank you. And Emily, you had spoken about the integration model and the idea of not to think about accessibility at the end, or when, like, not to start thinking about it when you're thinking about venue, but to think about it at the very beginning.
I mean, as I say, it's lovely that I'm here today, but I'm aware there's a whole task force of work that's preceded this. And I suppose that's my question and my ask and my plea is that, you know, that we're at the start, that we're really, as I say, I would really love to see a task force. I think that would really make progress, because we've seen task forces work. And then just that model is kind of applied to every organisation, just representation, documenting, that means relationships and discussions and sharing, and then support, because we are the people who end up having to call things out. And the other thing to say is that, you know, hopefully with the grace of God or whoever you believe in or whatever you believe in, we all get old. So we are really providing for ourselves as we age. And we know since COVID, there are more disabled people, more ill, chronically ill people. So we need to consider all, and we can do it, yeah.
Absolutely. Another question.
Hi.
Sunil. Hiya.
Hi. Thanks a lot, Ruth. Just another question to Emily. I just want to ask you, have you had any direct communication with venue owners and promoters? It would seem that sometimes the people that can best influence venue owners could be performers like yourself, but also promoters or venue managers as well. I'm presuming that if you do have some experience, that it hasn't been so positive so far. And if so, is there any more you'd like to share just in terms of what they say are the barriers? Is it down to structural issues with the venue, as some of them will say? Is it financial issues? Do they want to have the conversation? Obviously, it's also going to be down to certain venues that lead the way. And I think that grading idea that you've mentioned is really, really positive, and it should be adopted here. But I'd just like to get maybe some of your further thoughts on that, if possible.
Thank you very much for the question. So I suppose, actually, I think I forgot to say in my intro that my speaking up has led me to sort of be the founder of DADA, Disabled Artists, Disabled Academics, and that has just, speaking up about these barriers has drawn more and more artists to me who just say, me too, just, that's because it's the reality of the barriers that we face. And I suppose a lot of my work, our work to date, has been political, as in, well, I've done a lot with we've presented to the Committee on Disability Matters on the subject of culture and access, October 21. We gave a briefing in Leinster House last May or June, and I'm delighted that my colleague, Saoirse Smith, comedian, is also here. She was with me that day. So I suppose we've spending a lot of time lobbying the politicians for change, in terms of the regulations and legislation, because again, I did actually sign up to the UNCRPD, believe it or not. And we are obliged to implement it by 2025. I'm not sure where that's at. And I suppose being here today in a way marks, the work is it's with politicians, it's with arts organisations, it's with disability organisations, it's among ourselves. The work itself is manifold. So in terms of talking to your venues, this work has taken me, I've spent a lot of time, it's taken me away from actually sort of doing a lot of my own jazz singing. But I think, individuals want to do it, they can. But I suppose I feel like we need more of a systematic move. That's why I'm saying about a sustained involvement with the task force or, the grading system. Because then people would know, and then that would set standards. So then if somebody puts a lift in and it doesn't work, it's like, well, actually we've got a grading, we've got a reason why this needs to there's accountability built in. I suppose it's the accountability that's a bit of a problem around this. So I think, does that answer it? I think venues, people are open. I think sometimes people get defensive because I guess everyone, but I'd say look, let's all learn together. And if there was a structure, then you could find your place within it and keep making progress. So maybe that answers. But I think, our cultural institutions do have an extra role to play because a lot of them are, like here, the National Gallery, a lot more accessible. So they could help with the disability side of the arts. They could really, because they are more set up. Thank you.
So we're up against time, but just to say, I think it's really brilliant that everyone's talking about trying to do things differently, making positive change and thinking about partnership and what we can do together that we can't do apart. So lots of great organisations referenced today as well for you to follow up with. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much to Ruth and the panelists. That was really, really, really informative and very, very illuminating conversation. So that was great. Next up, we're going to have Saoirse, who's going to give us a rapporteur of the afternoon's kind of events. Before that happens as well, I just wanted to say we are live streaming this event. And it will be available for a playback post event. So any of the information or any of the resources that you'd like to get, they will be available afterwards. Also, if you didn't have a chance to ask a question today, please engage online, you know, use the hashtag. I hate to say that on stage, but go on, use the hashtag, why not? And, you know, or even in the comments, you know, if you want to voice your opinion, like, please do, because that's kind of the entire point of this entire forum. So, yeah, we're just going to take a couple of minutes just to set up the stage, and then I'll invite Saoirse up. So, without further ado, I might invite Saoirse Smith to the stage. So Saoirse is a Dublin-based actor, performer and comedian, and she is a proud member of Disabled Artists and Disabled Academics and Disability Power Ireland. So without further ado, please.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for having me today. First of all, I just kind of want to give you my background. I am a comedian. That is my main art form. Very proud art form, I have to say. I'm very proud of it. I was born disabled. I have cerebral palsy. Now, I just want to kind of give you kind of stuff that I've had to deal with as a person with a physical disability. In 2019, I performed in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival doing my own show. I was not entitled to any grants to help with that due to, obviously, disabled people. If you get, comedy is not recognised within the Arts Council, and it should be. It's an art form itself. It is improv, it is sketch, it is art. And then, second of all, if I were to get that grant, I would lose my disability, and then I would also lose my medical card, because I don't just have a cerebral palsy, I don't just have a wheelchair, I have other problems. I'm a chronic pain sufferer, I have other medical issues, so I need my medical card. It is vital. I studied drama. I have a degree in drama. For years, I tried to be a stage manager, and I put on my own shows, but the physicality and the limitations within venues just made me give up, to be honest with you. I just got tired, depressed, and fed up with the situation. Many shows I performed in, I had to live physically, get out of my chair and crawl up onto the stage, hide in the side, wait to go on, and then crawl back down on my hands and knees, which I should not have to do. And this was in 2016. And after my Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I was, in 2019, I was in debt of €2,000. And I only received at that time €205 for disability allowance, which €50 of that went to my mother for rent. So I only had €155 to myself, which then I had to pay off my debt. So that I was broke for ages, so I couldn't actually live. So it was not fun. Just thinking about what Robbie was saying about nightlife and things like that, the majority of nightclubs, bars, venues are not accessible. If they are accessible in there, they do not have a toilet. Or if they have a toilet, there are steps up, which makes no sense whatsoever, lads. Like, you know, it's baffling. Like, here is fantastic. I said to the staff in the hotel, they have the gold standard of loos. You know, it's unusual. You have the gold standard of toilets. You know, we have a changing table, we have plenty of space. If a carer needs to be in there, they can be in there, and that person has privacy. So that is what we need to be looking forward to. And then in terms of the collaborators, who are the collaborators? That's one thing I want to know about the nighttime comedy, the nighttime economy. Like, who are they? Are they aware of disability? Have they lived experiences? Because that's the main thing that Emily was saying. We need people with lived experiences to be part of the nighttime economy. We need people like me, like Emily, like anyone with a disability, be it physical or hidden, to be part of the nighttime economy, be part of the trials, be part of everything. And when talking about Cork, the first thing in my mind was, like, if things were over 24 hours, transport. I don't know if anybody noticed, but if you're a wheelchair user, you have to book bus air in 24 hours in advance. So you cannot be spontaneous. So if you want to go see a show, you'll be like, oh, I can't do that because I didn't give 24 hours notice. If you want to get the Dart, it's 3 hours notice. Now, I never follow that rule. I got to be honest, I never do, because it's stupid. All right, it's stupid. And then if you happen to be on a normal bus, half the time the ramps don't work. So that's something the Arts Council are going to have to think about. And then shows outside. I took part in the Dublin Fringe Festival. I was part of Tech. It was an interabled dance performance by Croikland, and it was beautiful, and I was part of the Tech. But there was cobbles, there was things to, logistically, it did not work for me. But I did it because I loved the performance, I loved being part of it, and using my skills, using the skills that I learnt, you know. And comedy has let me use those skills so much. I'm the actor, I'm the writer, I'm the performer, I'm the producer, I'm everything. It's given me that freedom. The only problem is with my comedy is there's no financial, you know, benefits. There's nothing to help us, support us, is what we need. And also with venues, and there's so many young people who email me, text me, say, I really want to become a comedian. And I'm like, I'm sorry, there's no venues that are accessible. Because, see, if I'm going to do, you're probably wondering, but how are you doing gigs? I'm crawling upstairs to do gigs, on my hands and knees, on dirty bar floors. That's how I'm doing gigs. I am crawling up and down stairs. And you're probably wondering, why aren't the people who are running the gigs picking venues that are accessible? But where are they going to find these venues? There are so few of them. Where are they going to find them? And when I say to the council, why aren't we making buildings more accessible? They're like, oh, historical, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what about Ars to Neutron? That's completely accessible. And since when are buildings more important than people? Do you know what I mean? Thank you. And I'm a proud disabled person. I'm a proud disabled woman. But what I feel is that it is my environment that disables me more than me. My environment. And what I found recently was brilliant was the Independent Live movement doing a play that was about a disabled person and had a disabled cast and made it disabled friendly. And I thought that was brilliant. It was innovative. It was imaginative. This is something that we need to see. And we don't just need to see disabled actors playing disabled characters. Actors can play any character. Disabled people can play a character, any character. We just need people to be more open-minded, be more creative. That's what we need. We need more creativity. And I'm going to use Amsterdam because I was there last year, and I have to say, it was so brilliant to go around cobbles that did not make me want to fall out of my chair. You know, very flat, very even. But the Anne Frank house, it's old, you cannot get up those stairs, but they have a virtual experience. And I think with COVID, this should give us more ideas to have different experience for different people, but make it inclusive, and we need more inclusivity. I myself am still learning. I had to run my very first gig in July for Dublin for Disabled Pride Month. And first thing I had to think about was not just the venue, if it's going to be accessible for me, but accessible for someone who has epilepsy, who has maybe chronic pain, something. I had to think about all these different things, not just about me. And it was so difficult. And I would have loved to be able to go to the Arts Council and say, hey, do you have a grant as well or something that could help me put on this to celebrate disabilities, to celebrate different abilities? And there isn't. And especially comedy. And it turned out to be a brilliant success. And I would just like to say it was on a Tuesday, it was in a Tuesday night, and it was sold out. So comedy can be sold out any night. Okay, if there's drink involved and a good time, it'll sell out. Okay. Comedy is and also when Terry's talking about Ireland and saying, when I was looking at the slides, it wasn't showing the true Ireland. Our country now is so multicultural. We have so many different people in our country. I did not see diversity within any of the slides today. The true Ireland is different. It's diverse in so many ways. And we need to show diversity of all forms. But we also need to really include disabled people, because disabled people, even in these conversations in the political sphere, are forgotten. I feel like a second-class citizen in my own country. I do not feel like a person in my country sometimes. I feel forgotten, and it's not nice. But that's really like everything that I have really thought about and wanted to say. I just kind of want everyone to please, like, especially the accounts themselves, please be open-minded to what we say. We're not here to attack. We're here to work with you. We want to help you. We want to make it so much better because our Dublin, people in Ireland are getting older, which means the majority of these people in this room, you will have some form of a disability. Might be mild, might be severe. Aging is not fun. Believe me, I know. And then when Robbie was talking about nightlife and nightclubs, he did it separately. He mentioned nightclubs and then young people. But I'm like, put them together. Disabled young people. When I was young, I only went to places that were for disabled people. Like, you know, there needs to be places for everybody, so there's not such a big gap. People are still afraid of disabled people. I still have people coming up to me today when I'm going shopping saying, "You're great, you just did the shopping, well done." I literally just got my shopping. I'm great, yeah, thanks. You know, it's a thing that we all do. There needs to be much more integration, that we're just like everyone else. You know, the only difference between me and you guys right now is that I have a seat that's very comfortable. Just letting you know. That's the only difference we have. But like, I have a few minutes left. That's all I kind of want to say because Emily covered so many amazing things. My colleague Ailish also covered a great amount as well. Does anyone have any questions for me or anything like that? New looks finest, honey. So if you have any questions about disabilities or anything like that, or like any other experiences, or if you want to create something, what would be beneficial to you? Like what would help you as creators? I think would be great to know. But for me, what would help you if you did want to is to talk to people with disabilities within your community. Go to DADA. Go to DPI. Be open to new ideas. Be open to, especially with COVID, we use Zoom. Be open to that. Because a lot of people who couldn't see me perform, a lot of my friends who were disabled could not see me perform, saw me through Zoom for the very first time. And they were like, "I want to see you live." And I'm like, "I really wish you could, but I can't bring you." So just be open to so many options of this and everything else. But that's me, and thank you.
Thanks so much to Saoirse. Yeah, that was brilliant, Saoirse. Thank you so much. Thanks for being so eloquent and extensive in your description and declarative as well. I think that's really, really useful for the audience as well. So thank you so much for that. Next, I'd like to welcome up Catherine Martin TD, the Minister for Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sports and Media. Before I do, I just want to give tribute to Minister Martin as well. Just in relation to driving, I suppose, this conversation around culture at night and in making it so open and inclusive as well. I think, you know, there's a lot of problems that we're talking about, issues that a lot of communities face in relation to the nighttime economy. Some of these conversations that we're having today aren't super comfortable, I'm sure, for a lot of people in the room. And I think that's really important because there are a huge, like massive problems that we need to overcome. And I think, you know, the descriptions that Saoirse gave of her experience as a performer really kind of speak to how deep these problems run. So, you know, I genuinely believe the strength of our like cultural and social fabric plays such an important role in society in general. And the work of the task force in general and the work of these kind of events, I think it's a deeply important step on the path to solutions. So I believe, like, Minister Martin has been one of the most inclusive ministers I've ever come across, and yeah, I just wanted to pay tribute to her in that regard. So anyway, without further ado, I might just welcome the Minister up on stage to give some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie, for your kind words. Agus díomh a cardide agus gan buchas leis an gcomharla alíonn as an imeach seo óstáil aniu le takeíocht dom a roinse. Is ábhar misní é meascán daoine a eáil an seo inniu. Le rion sé go bhfuil muid sásta rudaí a dhéanamh ar bhealach difriúil cóphartaíochtaí nua a dhéanamh agus cóibriú ar bhealaí nua. It is really wonderful to see the mix of people here today. It allows us to look at international examples, find new partnerships and collaborate in new ways. And this is ultimately, I think, one of the most important aspects of what we are trying to do with this Nighttime Economy initiative. And Robbie, it's great to see you on MC duty. And I hear you could be sneaked into the civil service, you know, if you ever want another career, but thank you. Listen, since we launched the Nighttime Economy Task Force report in 2021, we have seen some concrete results and progress across the 36 actions in that report. But what is just as important for me in government is regular contact with artists, promoters and venue owners so we can talk about the issues impacting on all of you, frankly and openly, and try and find solutions together, and also discuss the many opportunities out there, some of which I'm sure have been outlined by speakers here today. I really welcome this engagement, and I believe that today's event is another important step forward, and I'm delighted that my department could support it. I know you're coming to the end of this afternoon's discussions, and I hope that the range of really interesting and diverse speakers, national and international, have provided us with new insights and new ideas, because we know that this area, above many others, is fast-moving and ever-changing, and we need to be flexible and open to changing how we do things. My own department is driving a range of initiatives which will really benefit from the learnings of today's event. The new Nighttime Advisors post, which will open for recruitment shortly and which my department is funding through our local authorities, will need to be innovative in how they approach planning for their own nighttime economies in the 9 cities and towns selected for this pilot. I'm sure Mirek in particular, who spoke earlier, has some important lessons to share here. I know that space and access to space can be a real challenge for artists and producers in the nighttime economy, and I hope we see some new partnerships emerging from today's event. We saw last year how our national cultural institutions took a leadership role and pushed boundaries by hosting new late-night events in their venues. The Haunted Dance Hall event in the National Concert Hall, for example, sold out both nights and saw the National Concert Hall transformed with acclaimed national and international electronic music artists playing to packed and excited audiences. We need to see more of this type of thinking. I would like to see the wealth of cultural and art centres and other community spaces we have right across the country working with the nighttime economy. Most of these are in the very heart of our communities. Let's look at them and see how we can make them more accessible. I see we have speakers, both artists and venue managers, from right across the country here today, and I'm sure your insights were particularly valuable on this, and I look forward to hearing the outcomes of these discussions. The Nighttime Economy Support Scheme, which I rolled out last year, had the aim of encouraging venue owners to open up their spaces, particularly in rural areas, to new and interesting acts, and we saw some great examples of innovation and diversity, and I know many of these venues are planning to continue with some kind of programming in the future. It is so important to create an environment where our nighttime offering is safe, diverse and inclusive, and that we ensure that it is accessible to all, regardless of age, gender, ability, sexual orientation or background. And I know there have been discussions just before I've come on the stage here about access and opportunities for artists with disabilities, and it's something that the Task Force and Arts Council will be examining closely and supporting where we can. So, Saoirse, I just say to you, you have been heard. Culture Night last year again showed a growing enthusiasm for later night events and innovative partnerships. I know Sinead O'Reilly spoke about this earlier, and we shouldn't underestimate the power this one night has to spark creativity and innovation. And I want to build on this in 2023. There are, of course, a number of challenges facing this sector, and I'm not shying away from these issues. The workshop we held on planning last year surfaced a number of real issues which we are trying to work through. I would argue too, however, that there are also really positive signs which are pointing to an optimism and a creative surge in the sector, a resilience and a willingness to try new things, and I want to support and encourage this. The government's plans to reform our licensing laws announced late last year will also, of course, help to support and grow the nighttime economy. The proposed reforms to the licensing laws, which the government launched, will be a major step in the right direction for all those working and making a living in the nighttime economy sector. The reforms propose efficiency, transparency and clarity, and a streamlining of our much antiquated licensing legislation, bringing it into the 21st century. We want this to create more freedom, more innovation for the nighttime economy sector, and open up opportunities for a more diverse and inclusive nighttime economy. Late night opening for nightclubs, increased opportunities for cultural venues through the provision of a cultural licence will also bring us towards a more modern European approach to nightlife. And we are working really hard to progress these reforms. Finally, I just want to say thank you to my colleagues in the Arts Council who are leading on a number of actions from the Task Force report with the support of my department. And I would also like to give Sunil Sharp and Robbie Kitt a special mention. They still give a huge amount of time and energy to ensure we are aware of the issues impacting on those in the nighttime economy. And I would also like to thank the other members of the Task Force Implementation Group, many of whom are here today. There is so much to talk about, but you can be assured that this government takes the nighttime economy seriously. And as Culture Minister, I know how important this is, not just economically, but from a cultural perspective. And I'm telling you here and now, you have my full support. Gurv Míle Mágaibh.
Thanks so much to the Minister. So yeah, that's basically us for the day. That's the forum. I hope you enjoyed it. I think, yeah, the conversations we've had today demonstrate how diverse and multidimensional these conversations are and how many different stakeholders are involved. So hopefully it sets the platform for continuing these conversations beyond today. And it is an annual forum, so we'll be back here next year hopefully as well. Hopefully somebody else will be behind the podium and I won't be in the civil service. So anyway, well, no, not to the crowded civil service. I will take this opportunity as well just to give some thanks as well to some of the most incredibly dedicated civil servants who are involved in the Nighttime Economy Task Force and who are doing an incredible amount of work in the background on this as well. So a big shout out to those in the crowd. Big shout out to Sinead and Deborah and Deirdre and all those who are involved in the Nighttime Economy Task Force as well. And yeah, so that's everything for today. Thank you so much for showing up today and I really appreciate your time. And please enjoy the offerings of the Nighttime Economy on a Tuesday evening in Dublin City. See you there.